Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for a very important day. My name is Chris O'Connell from Fox 29 News. We are proud to be here. I'm proud to be here. I don't know, how long have I been doing this day now? 5, 6 years now? 5 years? And the reason why Fox 29 is here, first of all, I want to thank our host, the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia, for having us today on this awesome venue. Thank you so much. Little bit different venue we have today, a little bit different format. We have great lineup of keynote speakers and a great lineup of panelists. And we are so happy to be here involved as Fox 29 as a journalist. Every single week we come across stories from police, law enforcement of elderly abuse, of the most vulnerable in our society who are victimized. And they're the easiest victims out there. And I see it every day. Whether it's from family members preying on their own family members to a roofer walking up to a door and knocking on and trying to get the money from them. They are the most vulnerable, and I see it weekly. And that's why we're here. And through the years I've been doing this, I've noticed just in society on how this problem is finally gaining traction. We have our district attorney here. We have a secretary of banking here. These are people that are investing their time, their resources, and the policy to try to help this. And thank you for coming here today to recognize, but we don't need you just to come here today. We need you to come here, take the information to your respective organizations and put this information into play, because we all know what's going on. It's the people out there, it's the people in the nursing homes, it's the families who are putting their family members in nursing homes that need to know about this stuff. And we not only try to talk about policy and regulations, but later on real life things that we could tell our own family members. I'm going through it right now with my parents. They're downsizing, and they're great. They're rock stars. They're 78 years old, and they're more active than any of us in this room. But I had to have the conversation with them. I had to be like, "Where's your money? What are we doing?" Because it's not a comfortable conversation to have, and you have to have it when they're well. You have to have those uncomfortable conversations when they're well, not when the time is not right. I want to introduce our keynote speakers right now. Our first one, our new district attorney of Philadelphia, who has transformed this office and has really been a tireless advocate for the real people. He spent most of his career in private practice, and now he's taking those thousands of cases, criminal and civil, and bringing them his experience and the intuition of his leadership, bringing on new leaders to combat this problem, to help the people that need it. Larry has been, throughout his career, had a steadfast commitment to the people with his clients, but now his clients are the people of Philadelphia. I had a chance to interview him when he was first in office, and he's not a politician. I know a lot of politicians. He's not a politician. He cares for the people. You see it in his eyes. You see it in the policies that he's doing. He's going to talk with you a little bit about what he's doing in his office to combat this problem of exploitation of our elders, of our most vulnerable of our society. Please welcome our new district attorney, Larry Krasner.
First of all, hearty thank you for being told I'm not a politician. I am truly grateful for that. And I hope it continues to be the case. Philadelphia, I understand, and I understand this because a lot of people who know the subject matter better than me told me this, is the oldest of the 10 largest cities in the United States. It is also the poorest of the 10 largest cities in the United States, and obviously this presents considerable challenges for those of us who really do want to do right by the underdog. Underdog obviously comes in many different versions, and it's not just our triumphant Philadelphia Eagles. It comes in many places and forms, but one of them is certainly seniors. As someone who is now eligible for AARP, having passed the milestone of 55 years, which is a success in and of itself, and both of whose parents passed away about 15 years ago, one suffering from fairly extreme Alzheimer's after a series of strokes, and the other one living in his own home and sharp as a tack at 86 years of age with a sudden heart attack. I've seen two different sides of what this can look like. I had a report recently about my father-in-law, which was troubling. Basically, what happened is he got a phone call. Phone call says, Ed, and Ed, by the way, was career military, lieutenant colonel, flew planes in 2 wars, did military intelligence. Ed, your grandson, Nate, who's my son, he's been in a terrible car accident. He's stuck in a jail in Arizona. He needs $2,500 right now to get him out. His nose is broken. Nate, talk to Ed. Microphone goes to someone who most definitely is not Nate. Grandpa, etc., right? And he went for it. Fortunately, his wife stopped him, but he went for it. He bought it without calling me, without calling his daughter, because it is that powerful and that effective. This is intolerable. It goes on all the time. It goes on in little $200 scams. It goes on in phone calls saying the IRS is going to take your house. You better go to Target right now since you don't have a working credit card. You better get a bunch of gift cards right now. And no matter how ludicrous that sounds, when you do it enough, and you do it enough to people who are vulnerable, you're going to get away with it. And some of those people are seniors. So it's something we need to do a lot about. The financial exploitation of seniors is over a $2.9 billion a year enterprise. And those are only the reported cases. Police, prosecutors, legislators, and the banking industry need to work together to educate, arrest, and prosecute these criminals and work with our elder advocacy groups, such as the Senior Law Center and CARI, which is the Center for the Advocacy for the Rights and Interests of the Elderly, to give our victims a voice and to proactively seek creation and enactment of laws that protect our elderly in civil and criminal courts. The DA's office in Philadelphia introduced 20 members of a new group, which is the Crime Victims Advocacy Council, who will be advising the district attorney's office on how to do better by victims. And one of those groups of victims, one of those groups of vulnerable victims we need to hold close is elderly people. We have to look at that. We also have to realize, and I'm not trying to get political here because heaven knows I'm not a politician, but we need to realize that the federal prosecution's role is changing. And they are not necessarily enforcing the same things that they did in the past. So anything that local prosecutors can do to step up, to fill a void, or maybe just to address new tactics that are being used to exploit the elderly is something we have to do. And I will tell you from 30 years in private practice, from having been a public defender for 5 years and private attorney for 25, who did both civil rights and also did criminal defense. These cases they're not always real simple. It's like most things in life. There are occasions when we have to look very, very closely because we may have an elderly person, and I've had this, whose signature is on a check, and yet that person says, I never signed that. Well, sometimes they did, and sometimes they did it in good faith, and sometimes through no fault of their own, their memory doesn't serve them well. So, as with all things, no one has a monopoly on the truth, but this much truth I do know, which is that elderly people are not being treated fairly by contractors, they're not being treated fairly by scammers, they're subject to a wide variety of victimization that is intolerable, and we have to stop it. I'd like to recognize and acknowledge Rashaji Green, Deputy Chief Counsel for Pennsylvania Senator Casey, who came all the way up here from DC, hopefully not from me. Robin Weissman, Pennsylvania Secretary of Banking and Securities. Our community partners, the Senior Law Center and CARI. Chris O'Connell, for having said I'm not a politician, from Channel 29. But I'd also like to suggest that Noelle DeSantis, who was a very, very long-term district attorney, then moved to the AG's office, and then I brought her back to the DA's office. I think she is emblematic of our good intentions and what we want to do. We are trying to increase the technological and technical capacity of the district attorney's office. We are in conversations right now with a, so far, very interested and generous Chan Zuckerberg initiative. They have some ideas about ways that we may be able to improve things. Well, I'd like to improve things so that we can be as good as it is possible to be with the resources available, then making it more, so that we can really help elderly victims and vulnerable victims of all kinds in any way we can. Anyway, thank you very much for tolerating my slightly over 5-minute comments. I wish I could stay longer because I'd really love to hear this. Unfortunately, we have a couple of other irons in the fire. But thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, District Attorney Krasner. A couple of things I wanted to bring up that DA Krasner just did. First of all, Noelle DeSantis, you'll be hearing from her later. She's on our panel. This is a new unit that the district attorney thought was so important that we develop a new unit dedicated to this kind of fraud. So we can't underestimate the moves he's already making. And also what he had mentioned, DA Krasner just formed a new, as he said, a new victim advocacy council. We can't underestimate that. That is something new he's also doing. He's bringing in advocates more so to help the victims of these crimes understand what they're going through and to make the process better. And again, when I cover these stories every single day, what do you see? What makes the headlines? I'll be the first to say, you see the mugshot of the guy who did it. You never see the guy who they did it to. And those are the people that we need to concentrate on, the victims, and that's what District Attorney is trying to do, to get these victims involved in the process to make the process a little better. Our next keynote speaker, we just heard from law enforcement. Now we turn to the regulatory side. That is where the laws need to change. This is where the legislature needs to hear what we're doing and what the real problems are and the real solutions. Because if we know, you hopefully know about this problem, it's constantly changing. Every day there's a new scam. Every day there's a new deal that you have to keep updated on, whether it's old things on new, old dog new tricks, or just new technology coming out that is scamming people that we don't even know about yet. So those are the things we kind of need to be looking at towards the future. Our next keynote speaker, again, we got the tops of the tops here when we're talking about what we're trying to do here. Our next guest is the Secretary of Banking and Securities. She's well known here in Philadelphia. She also served as a Pennsylvania Treasurer, as well as a Deputy Director of Finance for the City of Philadelphia. She has a long history in regulatory in this realm and connecting the dots when it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to the banks, when it comes to the committees and committees on aging. This is the kind of person that we are thrilled to have to talk about this, and she probably has to go too, right, after this?
I do.
That's okay, but thank you.
I'm spreading the word farther on a number of
Thank
things.
you. We really appreciate this heavy hitter slate of speakers we have today. Please welcome Secretary Robin Weissman.
Yeah, I'll probably make it session. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you're right. The reason I'm here is because our department and I personally, professionally care so much about this. I do want to mention, you mentioned that we have to have laws put into place that help protect our seniors. And fortunately, we have something pending in the state legislature that I'm very optimistic will be enacted, probably not before the budget. We're all grateful we'll have a budget this year on time, I think. But it may not happen this session, but it is going to happen. And it's much broader than legislation in many other states, because it's across the board protection for older Pennsylvanians. So keep your eye out for that. I'm optimistic that it will happen. I'm happy to be here again at the Federal Reserve. Big fan of President Harker and what this particular Federal Reserve Bank is doing. He's come and spoken to our staff. I really appreciate the fact that this Federal Reserve is very broad-minded and holistic in terms of all the work that it does in terms of financial health, equaling mental health, and mental health being enabling you to have financial health. So very, very, very happy that we're at this particular point in time, and he's going to be looking at CRA, we're looking at CRA lending and all of that. As Chris mentioned, first and foremost, the Department of Banking and Securities, and some of you have heard this before, I'm so glad to see you again. First and foremost, we are a regulator, and we regulate securities, we regulate banks, we regulate money transmitters, car finance companies, a broad swath of anybody who really deals with the transmission or the lending or the borrowing of money, we regulate. And we really are broad-minded in our worldview. We have a real focus on services for businesses, the businesses we regulate. We want to be a user-friendly regulator. We're helping, I just spoke yesterday on FinTech in Harrisburg for board directors on banks who want to know how we deal with that. It's not nearly as exotic as Silicon Valley wants you to think. They're still lending, investing, or sending money, and we just filter it down to what they're actually doing, and we do already have laws in place that apply to that. But also, we're so committed to the services for consumers. We're focused, and you all are focused on the elderly today, but one thing that also may impact them in terms of getting scammed is the opioid epidemic, because that has financial implications. And our department has pulled that together as well. And another thing you may not be aware of is the fact that we have a program for re-entry into society for inmates. We're working with the Department of Corrections. So we are taking a very broad approach, but an intensive approach. And one of the reasons we're focusing so much on elder financial abuse is because we call it the crime of the 21st century. There are a lot of other crimes, by the way, globally, but this is one that's just surging around our country and globally. And one study was very small. I think the district attorney cited 2.6 billion, but it's really much greater than that. A more comprehensive approach that says it's over 36 billion a year. So we have to pay attention to this. And Governor Wolf has a consumer financial protection initiative, one of which we are front and center on. Last week in the state capitol, we recognized AARP Pennsylvania for a 10-year alliance with them. And we also have worked, and I actually serve on the board now of the Investor Protection Trust, which also does a lot of financial education and outreach. We believe in training the trainer, so that we are very focused on trying to really proliferate the advocates for it, and also make sure that people like attorneys, accountants, CPAs, health caregivers recognize the signs of elder financial abuse. Big focus of ours. And we have many senior citizens who are volunteering. At the AARP recognition event last week, I had 6 or 7 seniors who were recognized for extraordinary dedicated work. As we all know, this is about mission. It's not just about money. And I think it's important for you to know that the Banking and Securities Department recognizes that in terms of all the work we do. EFI Legal, which is the Elder Investment Fraud and Financial Exploitation Protection Program, and Senior Safe, which helps professionals in financial services learn how to identify and report suspected cases of financial abuse, and are just some of the numerous ways which we are really working and on the front lines and in a very serious way every day. The 3 points that we typically make, or I'm advised to make as well, is that there are really 3 points about elder financial abuse, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here a bit, but first, the thing is that elder financial abuse victims come from all walks of life. It's the wealthy and also the very poor. And the stigma that's associated with it, none of us like to be taken. So the stigma inhibits self-reporting as well. So that's something that I think our caregivers, the accountants, CPAs, everybody has to be very aware of. Secondly, we all know about how important mental, emotional security is. And when this happens, it robs seniors of that sense of security, which frankly they deserve at this point in their lives. So it's really crippling in that respect as well. But the most important thing, and that's what you're all here for, and that's what we're working on, is making sure we raise awareness of this across the board. I think there's a lot of traction on this now. When we start to getting to numbers like 36 billion, there is a lot of, it becomes really significant, even in our economy. So we want to make sure seniors learn how to protect themselves. That's our initiative. But we also know that you all can help us connect with so many organizations. I'm going to give you one phone number, easy to remember, 1-800-PA-BANKS. We have people who are responding online. It's not a voicemail, typically during regular office hours. But we will get back to you, and if we can, one of the things I did very early on in my tenure is make sure all of the state agencies are connected as it relates to financial services, so that the different departments now know who to call if it's not in their place. So 1-800-PA-BANKS is a portal for you and all of the people that you talk to. Please spread the word, and thank you so much for having me here today.
Thanks, Secretary Weissman. Keep fighting for us in Harrisburg, right? If anyone noticed, I brought my twin girls with me today. They're 8 years old. Not thrilled to be at the Federal Reserve this morning on their first day of summer vacation. But I had some childcare issues. But one of my daughters, Eva, on the way in, I was trying to explain to her where we're going and what I'm doing here today. And I tried to explain to her like an 8-year-old could understand. And I who do the elderly people in their families? I said, Grandma and Grandpa, Mimi and Poppy. I said, what if people would steal from Mimi and Poppy? And she said, well, they have enough money. I said, no, that's not. And then my other twin said, well, why would anyone want to steal from them? I said, well, that's a good point. There are people that would. Well, we heard today from the city, we just heard from the state. Now we're going up the food chain a little bit to the federal government. Again, this is an important issue for all of us, and all of us from every aspect of our community have to pitch in. And our next keynote speaker, our final keynote speaker before we get to the panel discussion, is the Deputy Chief Counsel for Senator Bob Casey. And if you know, Senator Bob Casey is a ranking member on the Special Committee on Aging. That is the Senate committee that is on the forefront of these issues. So we not only have support in the city and state, but we have some major support on the federal level. Our next guest is helping Senator Casey on these various issues relating to older adults and elder abuse and financial exploitation. She is on the forefront of combating this kind of abuse. Please welcome Rasiji Green.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here with you today. As Chris mentioned, I work for Senator Bob Casey on his Senate Aging Committee staff, and we've been looking at a lot of issues related to elder financial abuse and particularly scams. Every day we know that there are reports of elder abuse and neglect and financial exploitation around the nation, and so very glad to be here with you today to talk to you a little bit about what's going on at the federal level, and really to hear about what it is that you're working on. So as we've just heard so eloquently, about the issues that are facing seniors, we know that this is literally $1 billion problem, several $billion. And the Aging Committee frequently hears from seniors and those who work with them on the ways that they are targeted and affected by these scams. And that's one of the reasons the Senator works so hard to stop this. As ranking member of the committee, the Senator has held hearings focused on issues related to financial exploitation of seniors through scams. And specifically, these hearings have discussed the ways that seniors fall victim to these scams, what we can do to help prevent it, and how we can stop these bad actors. In one of our hearings, we had Philadelphia's very own Diane Mineo from Cary to share what it is that she's heard from the folks that she serves. A few years ago, the committee launched a fraud hotline to assist seniors to make it a little easier for them to be able to report suspected fraud and abuse. And we also use that information to help inform the work that we do on this issue. Every year we produce a fraud book with the top 10 scams that we hear through our hotline, and I'll just run through the ones that we heard last year. They were the IRS impersonation scam, robocalls, sweepstakes scams, the Can You Hear Me Now scam, the grandparent scam, which is the one that pretty much that the district attorney just described, which a lot of grandparents hear about. Computer tech scams, romance scams, financial abuse, identity theft, and government grant scams. And frankly, even though these are the top 10 and these are the ones that we heard mostly about, we know that there are still so many others that affect seniors every day and that seniors hear about and are frankly victimized by every day. Another related issue that the committee has recently started focusing on is guardianship. In March, the committee held a hearing entitled Abuse of Power, Exploitation of Older Americans by Guardians and Others That They Trust. And we know that there are stories of guardian misconduct resulting in not physical and emotional exploitation, but also financial exploitation. In that hearing, we heard of the ways that state and localities are working to prevent seniors from being taken advantage of, including better reporting, but still we know that there is more work to be done, so be on the lookout for our work on that. And it's important to note that, as you know, in losing money to these scams, older adults not only lose their sense of security, but in some extreme cases, they may lose their complete financial independence. And it's outrageous that people who worked so hard all their lives to build their nest eggs are having them taken away from them. Many seniors, as it's been said so many times, many seniors don't feel comfortable reporting, and they shouldn't feel ashamed or embarrassed to. And so we have to create an environment where they are, where they know that it is okay to, which is what all of us are working to do. And this is why enforcement is such an important part of this discussion. And it may not be easy to track down these sophisticated scammers and their domestic and international networks as well, and to hold them accountable. We know that there are still efforts to do so, and we're having some successes. For example, the Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission recently announced an elder fraud sweep of more than 250 defendants who victimized more than 1 million Americans, and most of those were seniors. So we're grateful for these efforts, but we know that a lot of work remains, and so Senator Casey will continue to use the Aging Committee, his role in the Aging Committee, to highlight this issue and help consumers understand the threat. Senator Casey also believes that Congress must create more tools to help continue to fight this fight against seniors. Excuse me. This is why he joined Senator Collins, who is the chairman of the Aging Committee, in introducing the Senior Safe Act, which the Secretary just mentioned, which is a bill that encourages financial institutions to disclose suspected exploitation of seniors when they see it and protects them from being sued for making these reports. Thankfully, this bill passed both houses of Congress and was recently signed into law by the President. The Senator also co-sponsored another piece of key bipartisan legislation to help stop senior financial exploitation, which was the Elder Abuse Prevention and Prosecution Act. This bill does 4 main things to help address elder abuse, and I'll run through them quickly. First, it expands data collection to better prevent and respond to financial crimes against seniors. Second, it improves information sharing among government agencies between federal, state, and local authorities to develop best practices in the fight against elder exploitation. It also increases penalties for perpetrators of crime, including mandatory forfeiture, to deter future offenses. And also, finally, the bill increases training for federal investigators and prosecutors and equips each judicial district with at least one prosecutor having expertise with elder abuse cases. And I am thrilled to announce that this bill was also signed into law last year. Recently, Senator Casey and Senator Collins sent a letter to Attorney General Sessions after he appointed each of the elder justice coordinators to encourage those coordinators to work with stakeholders and local community partners to help educate local seniors about those who may be seeking to take from them financially. So as you can see, Senator Casey is working with his colleagues on a lot of things related to financial exploitation against seniors, and we will continue this work. But he knows that he can't fight alone, and that's why he appreciates the help of all of you and your efforts in helping to stop this abuse on older Americans. Thanks again for having me with you today, and I look forward to hearing all of the work that you all are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Rosiji. Again, when I first started doing this, we certainly didn't have this kind of lineup of speakers. That goes to show you the importance of this issue, and unfortunately, just goes to show you, which I know, the cases of these kinds of abuses are going up. We hope to think it's because of awareness is going up as well, but it's a problem that continues, and it's a problem we still need to address, and people in this room can do a long way in helping that. If I could have the panelists come on up. We're going to start our panel discussion. Let me get Joe. I think we're all going to come up here, right? Oh wait, I'm sorry, did I go out of order? No? Okay, that's right, all right. Typically I will.
I'll sit over there where I live. Good morning. I'm going to stand because you probably won't see me if I sit or stand behind that podium. I'm Linda Mill, and this is Noelle DeSantis, and we're here to talk to you about the real cases. As many of you know, I've known a lot of you over the years. I started working in the field of elder abuse when I worked at Wachovia, and Joe Snyder knocked on my door in 2003 and said, "We need help from banks." And together we've done a lot of work over the years, including forming this task force, and it's work that I'm proud of and work that needs to continue, and we need your help. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happens once you make a referral. What happens with some of these real cases? Now, we always have to start with the numbers, right? We don't really know how big the problem is. But we do know that the state of New York found that only 1 out of every 44 cases ever gets reported. We know MetLife did a program, they worked with Virginia Tech students to study the media in a given year and looked at all the news articles and everything on the internet that showed about financial exploitation of the elderly. And that was $2.9 billion. Well, put those two numbers together. You're bankers, you're numbers people, right? You're going to hear 2.9 billion. You're going to hear 36 billion. That's the TrueLink study. But if only 1 of 44 cases ever gets reported, and you know yourself how many cases you've ever worked hit the news media, I think it's over $100 billion problem. This is Linda Mill's number. There's a lot of people that have talked about it. You won't find it in a published study, but you just have to do the math, right? It's not a $2 billion problem. It's not a $36 billion problem. It's got to be well over a $100 billion problem. And these numbers were from 2010. So it's just getting worse. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work I had the privilege to do for the state of Pennsylvania through a cooperative program with Temple University. I took a step away from banking for about 5 years and got to actually help prosecute the cases that were coming through. One of the biggest problems that we have with the community of adult protective services is they're under-resourced and overworked. There's too many cases coming in, and then they try to refer them to law enforcement, and law enforcement, with all the best intentions, don't have the resources to prosecute all of these cases. They need somebody to take the time to pore over the boxes of bank records and put the cases together. I was lucky enough to get to do that for a couple years and actually see some justice. So in this particular case, I call this my soccer mom case. And I like to show this picture to every time I train tellers and bank personnel, because this is the face of a thief. It's not the scary guy that people usually think of. This is the face of someone who committed massive exploitation against her aunt. And it's consistent. Majority of perpetrators of financial exploitation are women, of elder abuse in general, because they're the caregivers. They're the ones taking care. You know, ARP recently released a study where they surveyed people. Who do you think is committing elder abuse? Most people don't realize the majority of it is family. And in my experience, the majority of it is family using a power of attorney. Right, Dana? Yep. Dana from Senior Law will back me up on that. Power of attorney instrument, which is so important in older life when used appropriately, also becomes the tool of theft. So what happened in this case? This was from York County. This woman, this case came to light because the aunt's bills were not being paid in the nursing home, right? So when they investigated to find out why not, they found all her money was gone. And they found out that her niece, acting as power of attorney, was helping herself to all these funds. Interestingly enough, her husband was a police officer for the city of York, Pennsylvania. But she was stealing all this money, and she was doing it very blatantly with lots of red flags. The problem that we have to overcome as bankers is just because someone has a power of attorney doesn't mean they have the right to steal. And when it's blatantly obvious that they are misusing that fiduciary authority, we need to step in and make a report. We need to step in and help prevent that. There was tons of transactions that I traced from her account, her aunt's account, straight into her account through online banking. She refinanced the condo, got a second mortgage on it. All of the proceeds went to her. She eventually sold the condo, took the proceeds, because every time she needed more money, she had to find a new way to do it. And the banks never said anything. There was 2 different banks involved. Because she was the power of attorney, right? She's an authorized signer, right? We can do something. If you leave no other idea here today, the most important idea I want you to leave with is we can do something when we believe a power of attorney is abusing their authority. Because this woman started with over $300,000 in assets and ended up in debt. And where did the niece spend it on? Well, I drove past her house and it was surrounded by a big high fence. Thank goodness for Google Earth, because I got the overview picture of the brand new swimming pool, and I had a copy of the checks that paid for the brand new swimming pool. It was all lifestyle. She didn't use it because she really needed it. She used it because she wanted it. It was too easy. She had those funds. Luckily, we did get justice in this case. And the thing I liked about the justice in this case, which actually was prosecuted by the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office because of the husband's involvement with local law enforcement, she went to jail for 5 months. And I'm sure that pretty blonde 5 months in York County prison was not fun. And And then she was released on house arrest and then eventually probation. And the reason I like that sentence is she got a little bit of taste of justice, of what it's like to be incarcerated, but then she was let out to go back to work to earn the money to pay it back. She's still paid. She was convicted in 2012, and every so often I go out on the Pennsylvania judicial docket. It's only $200 a month, which kills me, but she is still paying. She's one of my best payers of all my old cases. She's never missed a payment. And she's gonna have to be writing that check for the rest of her life. As I said, there were plenty of red flags. You can refuse to honor the transactions of a power of attorney under Pennsylvania state power of attorney law as long as you make a report to Adult Protective Services. It's in the statute, consult with your legal departments. The other thing is Pennsylvania has adopted the Uniform Commercial Code, the Uniform Power of Attorney Act, and it's in there. So whether your case is in Pennsylvania or in another state that is under the Uniform Power of Attorney Act, we do have cover to refuse to honor those power of attorney transactions, to freeze those accounts. A lot of legislation has been passed to give us safe harbor with those transactions as well, but we can make a difference, we can say no. And that's the big thing I want you to remember about all of this. But it's not just about the money. I saw cases and autopsy reports of people who rotted to death after all the money was gone. This was a case that our office at Temple helped out prosecute. Most particularly, Dr. Ron Costin worked on this one with the Pennsylvania State Police. But this woman had no family, and somehow this couple in her community learned that she had a $110,000 trust fund. This is up in Monroe County. They took all of her money over a very short period of time. They then installed her in an apartment that they had rented that basically had nothing in it. I think it had a chair. I don't even think there was a bed. There was something on the floor for her to sleep on. And they abandoned her. It isn't just about the money. I've seen the autopsy photos. Sadly, it can get very bad once the money runs out. And I'm not here to dampen the mood here today, but I'm deadly serious because it is a deadly serious matter. And you have to understand, it's not just about the scams. It is about saving someone's life. The referral you make to protective services could save someone's life. And now I'm going to let Noelle talk about some cases right here in Philadelphia and the work that she's doing at the District Attorney's Office.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Linda, my co-presenter, and everyone else who's invited me today, and all the guest speakers. I've been a prosecutor for 18 years. I was at the DA's office right out of law school for 16 years, and I know most of my partners from Senior Law Center and Cary, and part of the task force in the beginning when I was handling in South Philadelphia elder abuse cases and vertically prosecuting them. From the time the detectives would get the case, they would call me and be a part of actually some of the interview process of the defendant and be there for the victims and work directly from the cases so the victims only have one prosecutor and not the general, a young prosecutor, and then get the more senior prosecutor down the line. So I work directly with the investigators or for individuals like Linda or in PCA that were doing those type of cases. So the first case that I have is a case that happened in Graysbury of an 87-year-old woman who had her routine. We had lovely chats about her daily routine, and she was, at that age, very scheduled. She went to Rite Aid, and she was getting her prescriptions, of which her family told them they were for her memory. It was for blood pressure, but you know. She was coming out, and she was approached by two men and a woman. And they try to do this scam to her, like, do you want to make extra money? We have this bag, you can make extra money. And she sees her bus, and she's panicked because she's on a schedule. She has a schedule. She doesn't be out after dark. It's the afternoon. She has to get back to her house. She says, no. She tries to push past them. She can't get past them. The two men drag her towards a vehicle. with the woman. So one of the men sits in the back seat with her, the other male is the driver, and the female is in the front passenger seat. They drive her around for hours demanding to know where her bank is. They want her to tell the bank. At that point, she's scared, but she's trying at stoplights to open the doors. But it has to be, what we thought later, a former police vehicle because it was an older type car that wouldn't have child locks back in the day. So she can't get out. So finally, after about 4 hours, she's completely panicked because she knows it's going to get dark. She tells them where her bank is. They drive into the bank parking lot. She gets out of the vehicle, and the woman accompanies her into the bank. The woman tells the bank teller, I'm her niece. Now, the tellers work with her because she was on a schedule. This was her regular bank in South Philly that she went to all the time. And they don't make her stand at the teller because she's older with a cane. So they have her sit down at one of the seats. And she says, the quote niece, the target is saying, well, she wants the $600. Well, that's like most of her account. So the teller's concerned, and he's been trained correctly to keep asking questions to her. But she's afraid because she's literally been driven around terrified for hours. And they told her they would harm her if she said anything when they went to the bank. But he's recognized her because he usually waits on her once a month when she gets her Social Security and deposits it, so he knows her. He then says to her, are you sure that you want to take out this money? And she has her head down and she's not making eye contact, and she says, yes, I need the money. And the quote niece is saying it's for groceries, she needs the money. So they leave the bank, but the bank teller is so concerned, which is really the linchpin of this case. He goes and tells his manager. And the manager says, okay, we'll preserve the videotape for the bank that's videos, and we'll make sure that we hold on to that just in case a report is made. The interesting thing, as all of our guest speakers spoke about, is that the shame of reporting this because they don't want their family members to think that they fell for a scam or that they're losing it, and they're going to put them in a home, and they're going to lose their independence. It's like a whole domino effect of fear that the elderly lives in. She doesn't report it. Her nephew is a police lieutenant in the Philadelphia Police Department. You would think if any victim would report it, it was someone who had a relative. No. A month goes by, this happens in the fall. We're getting closer to Christmas. She can't afford any gifts. So she tells her sister, mother of the police lieutenant, who of course immediately calls her son, calls the detectives, who calls me, and we all go out and visit her at her house in Grays Ferry on Hicks Street and sit there and take her report, surrounded by her doilies and little cakes. And we're like, why wouldn't you report this to me? You just have to tell your nephew. No, I didn't want him to know. I didn't want them to know. And so because that teller told the bank to preserve that video, they turned it over to the detectives. The detectives were able to get an ID. Glorious luck because the female defendant was able to be identified. We were never able to catch the male defendant. The female defendant was able to be identified because she had a phone book record. She had been doing 40 years of scams her whole life. Literally, it was an entire Redwell that I handed the defense. And so be it, one of the detectives that's standing around the computer watching this video of this whole transaction occur and the conversations and her head being down, the female recognizes the female. He's arrested her before when he was in a highway cop. So now he goes to the machine and starts looking through all the mugshots by putting in her identification in terms of the age and when he remembers the case, and flips through. On the third page, he finds her mugshot. They put it in a photo array, they take it back to 87-year-old victim, and she identifies her, and then an arrest warrant is prepared, and then I get the case and we begin to prosecute it. I preserved that testimony by video evidence with the judge's permission by passing all the discovery to the defense attorney, and thereby a preservation preliminary hearing. Preliminary hearing is the first stage of the case, where we're alleging you committed all these crimes. We have to get it held for court, or a judge finds there's enough evidence that we can take you to trial on those cases. So a preliminary hearing is the first step in the process. But for an elderly person, that's how we have Carrie in Senior Law Center, to walk them through that, to have an advocate that sits there with them, even though they've been enjoying my lovely visits at their houses and talking about what's going to happen. They need somebody else there to be like, I'm really afraid. I don't want Noelle to be upset with me. Do you think she'll be upset if I tell her I don't feel good right now? I need a break. No, I want to know those things as the prosecutor. I don't want you being up there being scared. We preserve it by video through a motion that the judge signs, and then there's no objection. So as much as I don't like maybe that question the defense attorney is asking, they're allowed to ask it. That's because if down the road, it may take 2 years to get this case to trial in the Philadelphia dockets and how busy we are, if at that point that victim is incapacitated or cannot remember specific details, we would have to present a motion to the judge, a trial judge at that time, to say we would like to present to the jury the videotaped testimony of the victim, because that was closest in time to when the event happened. So usually it'd be like a month or two later, because I had to get a special courtroom, I have to get permission to bring the video equipment. Mr. O'Connell knows video equipment cannot be in a courthouse under Pennsylvania law. We cannot have video equipment in a courtroom. We only have it specifically for this purpose. So that was a case that we ended up taking that case. She did not have to testify at trial. Remember, we were in front of Judge Seisler, who looked at the defense attorney and said, Noelle's offer is better than what I'm going to give her if she decides she wants to plead open to me, meaning let me determine her sentence. And the defendant's family was like, don't you have any sympathy for my mother? And I said, don't you have any sympathy for the victim? Because she ended up, by the time we went to trial, she was like 89 and was not as lucid to be able to testify, which the defense didn't really know that. But, you know, the evidence was so overwhelming with the video, with her, and she would never give up her male cohorts that probably continued to do this scam to many other elderly people. They were just minus the female in their group. I'm certain they recruited another female. But I had originally offered 6 to 20 years imprisonment for her, and she ended up going to Judge Brinkley, which was one of the judges I was assigned to at the time, and we negotiated a sentence to be 4 to 12 years in state prison for her to serve, of which she did serve more than the maximum of that case, based upon her lengthy record and her refusal to admit the consequences of her actions and how that happened. Another case, and she had very good family support too, like I said, she had a member of the police department. So you're not thinking it's someone who's not educated or understands the system. She was very proud of her nephew, who was a police lieutenant, who's now a captain. She just was so afraid of all the other consequences that her family would think. And the only reason why she came forward is because she didn't have money for Christmas presents. And that's the only reason she told her sister. If not, we would have never gotten it. But the fact that that bank teller was so intuitive by learning from these type of seminars to save that video. Without that, she was so scared she wouldn't have been able to give us a very good description of the female and the two males. And because it was so long in the car, the female sat in front of her. But because of that bank 15, 20-minute transaction on video, that's what got us the key. The second case is a little sadder than the first case that I did. Was an elderly woman. She really had not a lot of family. South Philly Keith calls like my baseball case. She was also up in her 80s, and she had been a typist, a clerical typist in the Navy Yard her whole career. She was a single woman, she never married, and she amassed a lot of money. She was a saver, kind of like a little bit of a hoarder, but she was a saver. And so she had an account that had a lot of money in it, and she was very frugal with her spending. But she didn't have any idea of what you call a MAC card, an ATM card. She was older school, and she didn't understand that. So at one point, a fraud investigator at a bank is noticing massive amounts of transactions, 435 transactions in a 5 or 6 week period. And so at first they start calling, and they're calling on the phone, there's no answer machine, she doesn't have an answer machine. They start sending letters, they're not getting a response. This is the good example of the fact that the fraud investigator at South Detectives had worked with those, he was a detective for 42 years, he had worked with so many of the different bank fraud investigators that fraud investigator from that bank called him directly and said, listen, Detective Strop, could you do a welfare check on this victim? I'm really worried, like a massive amounts of money is leaving her account, and this is not like her spending. She would always she was old school, she would go, withdraw the money, go to the gas company, pay it, go to the PICO and pay it, go to all those actual utilities and pay them at the desk and get her little receipt. She never wrote the checks to them. So they were like, what is this money going to? And the type of transactions they were would be like going to a 7-Eleven and buying a $2 drink and withdrawing $200, like to get the cash there. She didn't even understand how to do that. Now they had mailed her this ATM MAC card that had been activated. they were like, well, maybe she's learning how to use it. But they said it's still too crazy. It's still out of norm of her spending habits. So the detective goes to the house. I have to take another detective who can pick locks. They can't get in, they can't get in. So at some point, they're gonna call fire board to break down the door because they're like, she could be deceased, as Linda saying, like, there's something very, very wrong. She finally comes to the door. This woman had the best eyesight in the world, let me tell you. She couldn't hear anything. Her hearing was totally shot. She needed hearing aid, so they're banging on the door. So finally, she sees out the window that the two big detectives are standing outside her door, and she answers it. They sit her down, and they say to her, what's going on with your account? She goes, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about. They're like, ma'am, you have $60,000 in 5 weeks that has left your account. No, that's not true. And they say, well, let me show you some of this paperwork. The detectives have contacted us. And she says, what is that plastic card? And the detective's like, this is an ATM card, and you go and take it. She had no idea. The neighbor down the street, because she only had nieces that were just not helpful to her, didn't care for her, and just were waiting for her to pass away so they could collect her inheritance. No one really checked upon her. Her neighbor was helping her and getting her mail. Well, the neighbor, who was also elderly himself, who had a gambling and drug addiction problem, decided that, wow, this MAC card came in the mail, I'll get her mail for her, and I'll walk it to her door. Well, he took it, he opened it, he activated it, and he turned off the ringer to her phone. So the bank's calling her, doing what they're supposed to do, trying to get a hold of her. The bank is sending her stuff in the mail. Well, this bad actor, this neighbor, is intercepting all of that. So it continues to go undetected. So during this 6-week time span, and I love when they say you call your bank and it's like, this is being recorded, and you never really think that comes in helpful, as a prosecutor did in this case, because he kept disguising his voice as a woman, and only one operator out of the 6 was like, you sound like a man. No, I just have a cold. And so, like, you know, and he got to the point where he could withdraw almost $1,200 to $1,500 a day, hence this massive amount of spending. So the detective's now on the case, and the fraud investigator's on the other side, and they're working with the bank together trying to figure it out. At one point, there's a transaction of the Phillies game. He goes to Citizens Bank Park and uses the money to buy fan photos. And that's when the detective goes down, executes a search warrant at Citizens Bank Park to get a copy of the fan photos, and lo and behold, it's the elderly neighbor down the street with everybody else in the block that he's treating to the Phillies game, and the fan photos are what gave us our identification. So then we put his picture in a mugshot in a photo array for the elderly victim. That's right, that's my neighbor down the street. He helps me, he gets my mail, he brings it in the house, and sometimes he brings in some of my groceries and things. Great, that's how the phone got turned off, and that's how every piece of mail was intercepted. She suffered probably at that point from late stages of Parkinson. So even visiting her, so we had to bring her down to the detective division because her house was so unstable with the hoarding, and we all could not physically sit there. So we brought her down to the detective division, and pretty much everyone on the second floor heard our interview because, like I said, she could not hear very well. But she also was a case that should have been called into Adult Protective Services because literally she said to me, do you have a tissue? So I handed her one of my tissues, like my puff pack and my purse. She started taking apart the tissues of all the different layers so she would have more tissues. So then I gave her every tissue I had in my purse. And I was like, you know, man, what's going on with your socks? They were the paper towels that you get in like a ladies' room here that she had wrapped around her feet. And I said to the detectives, what's up with this clothing? And they're like, this is the best, we made her change for you. I'm like, this is the best that we have? I'm like, are you sure? And they're like, no, well, seriously, like, this is upsetting. So immediately I called Adult Protective Services. I'm a mandatory reporter to do that, so they were on it. But it was very sad because she she could not understand. When we're trying to explain to her what ATM card, she's like, is it like Strawbridge's? Is it like the Strawbridge credit card? And we're like, kind of, yes, but it has money that goes away, not putting on it, and then you pay it back. Like, she could not understand the MAC card situation. It got to the point where she went to the main branch of the bank every day to talk to her person, and, you know, did not understand. And we were explaining to her the detective was a gem. I mean, he was just great. But he himself was older too. But it hastened her death. Like, we could not preserve her testimony at the preliminary hearing because she showed up one day without the knowledge of the preliminary hearing. I mean, it just got to the point where we had to do the preliminary hearing at that point. She had taken a very quick turn. It just broke her. And that was frightening for me because, you know, this defendant was so treacherous in how he did this that she really was healthy besides that with the Parkinson, but she just could not understand. She lost that financial independence, she lost that safety net, and she just had no close family, and she thought this neighbor was really someone who was helping her, and really they were someone that totally destroyed the end of her life. We were able to do the preliminary hearing and get past it to get it to trial, the next level, because of the phone evidence that the bank turned over, because of the documented evidence in terms of the accounting and those reports, as Linda has discussed. But, you know, it had to be compromised, and he pled guilty open in front of another judge who gave him like a house arrest sentence, despite his confession, of which the detective thought this was just desserts, because when he confessed or something, I don't know, they picked him up, when they arrested him on the warrant, it was raining or something, he had to be transferred down to the roundhouse to be processed, and they had to put a garbage bag over him. So I was like, well, that made me feel a little bit better. That's how he left the thing or something. I mean, it was really terrible, and she was such a lovely lady. And we're sitting there, but someone that was in clear distress, that had Adult Protective Services been notified earlier, they probably could have stepped in. So that's, I think, where Linda's saying at that point, when you notice that, calling the detective directly that fraud investigator had a contact person was great, but probably also have calling so that Jennifer and Joe, they would have gotten Adult Protective Services. We probably would have stopped it earlier and maybe gotten her more help before it became, when I got involved in it with the detectives, it was very late toward the end of her thing, and it broke her, and she just could not withstand it. But that was probably, but it shows the fact that fraud investigator could call the detective directly, which is very important. But if another call to Adult Protective Services, I called when I saw her in person, which was like a week or two later, but that's probably was not enough time with her registering the shock of what had happened to her. So, questions, and we'll go over with the best practice.
Anybody have any questions? Yeah, any questions? One of the things that, to reinforce some of the things you heard from Noelle is the critical importance of early reporting and the preservation of that evidence, right? This bank fraud investigator was doing the right thing, but it was $60,000 later. The bank teller was doing the right thing by asking their manager, but no report was made to Protective Services at the time of the incident. Now, they preserved the evidence, which you heard was critical, but it could have been done earlier. The great thing for me that I like to hear, that I think for those of us that have worked in the fraud world for a long time, is this was a $600 case that Noelle's office prosecuted. When's the last time you heard that?
Right, and
So,
funny thing
thank you.
is, when she was arrested, she had $600 on her. And I made the judge, it was like a whole loophole to get that $600 off. The detective and I personally drove her to the roundhouse. He had a park outside. I walked upstairs and sat with her, and she was asking me, why do people eat outside? I think it's like germy and dangerous. It's like our whole conversation. While I'm waiting for them to turn over this $600 check, we had to go to evidence first at City Hall, where she waited outside. Go to the roundhouse to get the $600, so that literally that was her life savings. And had she not been found to the judge, well, there's $600 on her person when she was arrested. I'd like that money to be the money for my victim. And the judge agreed. It just was a lot of red tape to get it back to her. And then we drove her to the same bank branch. And I walked her in with the detective, and she deposited it. But that is true, $600. Yes? Need a microphone for the questions? I think we have to turn it off for a second.
We're gonna have some time for questions after too with all of our panel, but Dane?
So I'm Dana Goldberg, I'm the Director of Victim Services at Senior Law Center. It's not so much a question, but it's also that I do get frustrated on the civil side as well. So we often work in tandem with the criminal side. Because sometimes on the civil side, that's where we can also freeze assets, we can go after in different ways, that not just the restitution, but we can go after and recover real estate, you know, have that sold, do a whole bunch of different things. And of course, where the power of attorney is involved, then oftentimes there needs to be civil parts that involve the orphans court in conjunction with what's going on in the criminal side. But it's very frustrating, and I think it's very enlightening to see here the small thing that the bank can do in terms of preserving that video. And I often talk to financial institutions, they're like, well, you know, Dana, like, it costs money and this and that. I'm like, but in the scheme of things, the money that's leaving your institution and once that gets out, you know, and like, oh, well, the bank didn't do anything, it's relatively a small thing that you can do that doesn't require any change in anything. Most banks are doing it anyway. And so if we had it longer preserved than 30 days, because let me just tell you that the investigations alone on these that's not a realistic time frame. So this is a small piece that I think you could take back to your institutions to say, hey, that's really not going to cost us that much, you know, in terms of what we do. We do it already, and why couldn't we extend the time period that we save that tape? Because both the civil parts of that, the criminal parts, and if the regulator comes down on you, you've got all of that stuff preserved, and it puts you in a better position. And you get to say, hey, look at what we're doing to make senior banking, you know, better. So anyway, that's just my comment. Thank you.
And I would just add, not only the video, but as you mentioned, the phone call.
Yeah, the phone call was great.
Yeah.
They were, all 6 of them were preserved, and that was really good because it also showed the deception level as the individual was a male pretending to be the woman who never had called that line either because it's on the back of the MAC card that she didn't even know what it did. So, I mean, and that was extremely critical and important because that's what got the plea in that sense. Because at that point, I had to do the victim impact statement for that victim. And I remember being upset and telling that judge, like, well, she's not here because of what he did. Like, this isn't a house arrest type sentence. He should go to jail. He should be in jail because her jail was death. Like, her death was fed up by what happened. And what did he do? He spent it on personal things to make his own lifestyle better because he didn't want to work for that money. But unfortunately, he was not successful in that because he presented himself as being an older man who had gambling and a drug addiction problem. And thereby, you know, the judge, and the job of the judge is to weigh both sides. But it's harder when you don't have a victim sitting there, when you have advocates in yourself being there because you're the only one that knew them as a person. And I mean, I remember my voice getting shaky and getting upset one of the days, like, are you all right? And I'm like, no, I'm really not. Like, this was a person to me, like, this person should have been here to testify. It was a detective and I up there. And that's where this is so crucial and important to work together. That's why my name's gonna be in all the contact forms. Even if you have a question at the bank, call me and I'll call Dana, call myself, call Karen. We'll walk you through what we can do from our side so that if you need help, we can work on it together.
You have another question?
Hi, could both of you talk a little bit about how you get tipped off? Like, what are most of the calls that you get from banks or family members? Like, how does it start?
I think a lot from the DA's office is, there is an Attorney General's hotline, there's an elder abuse hotline. A lot of our stuff will either come through Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, it'll come directly from family members who may call my office, like regular line, and they'll say, well, there's a call about a senior, since I'm back in the office, and I'll talk to them. And then I'll say to them, well, the way things get to me is that I have to have a police report. And even if the police report, you have to call the police, 911, and they'll come to your house and they'll take a report. It's called a 7548, it's a long skinny document, it has multiple pages, and everyone gets a copy of that. There may not be an arrest right away, but that creates a case number. We call it a district control number. And copies of those 48, that initial police report, is sent to the senior law center in Cary so that if someone is, if there's never anyone arrested, the senior still has services. I wouldn't necessarily see them until one, someone calls me that's a family member, or the victim directly themselves, or someone from Carrier Senior Law Center has been assigned that case and says to me, Noel, it's been assigned to Detective such and such at Northwest Detectives or South Detectives. And you follow up with it, and I'll follow up with them. And maybe through doing something on the civil side, this has happened, more information is coming out, and the victim needs to be re-interviewed because maybe they realize something in the paperwork, and the detective who's investigating the criminal side doesn't know about that, so I can connect them together. Once it becomes a criminal case that's been probable cause, search warrants are done, an arrest warrant is executed, the defendant's been arrested, then it comes into my role as a prosecution where I will go to the preliminary hearing, start speaking with the defense counsel, make the decisions about filing the motion for preservation, depending upon the health and the age of that individual. Sometimes victims also don't tell us, but they'll tell the advocates, like, I'm really suffering from cancer, or I have this other debilitating kidney failure disease. Those are important too. They may not necessarily they may not be in their 80s, they may be in their late 60s, still young, but they have another medical problem. And that's also a reason for us to file that preservation motion, because they may not be well in 2 years.
We're going to save questions for after we have a full panel, if you don't mind. We want to move on a little bit. Noel, Linda, thank you. You can stick around, hopefully. Maybe questions later.
I'll be here all day.
Well, I have to take task with one thing you call these people. You call them bad actors.
I call them defendants.
We call it something.
Yeah, I call them slime. Well, to lighten things up a little bit, we had some sad stories, but important ones, and it just goes to show, standing from where I am as a journalist, those are stories we never hear about, the $600 ones, and there are so many of them. I'm sure so many that you guys can't even handle, and again, many of them, most of them, go unreported. We wouldn't be here today without our next gentleman. The task force is, his words, not mine, a baby of his. He just retired. I heard someone call him an expert on aging, but he just retired, and I call him an expert on youth. It must be the tennis he plays. Joe Snyder, he is, this task force is his baby. It's close to his heart. He has some awards to give out. Please welcome Joe Snyder.
Hi, everybody. That was great. Thank you. That was a great panel. Thank you, Noel and Linda, two proud members of the task force. And as Linda said earlier, we are really thrilled that we started this in the early 2000s, the partnership together. In fact, Linda, when she was at Wachovia, and me at Philadelphia Corporation for Aging, still had the only a program between an APS program and a national bank where we protected $62.5 million in assets and had all kind of other great outcomes. So we're really proud of this. This is the awards part. This is fun. One of the things that we constantly need, we all know that prevention is the best way to handle this, and we need awareness. And even though the awareness is still growing, we still have an issue. Last month, Wells Fargo put out an elder needs survey, and they asked investors, older investors and their children, do you think you're more at risk as you age? Do you think people are more at risk as they age? And the older investors, 98% of them said yes. The children, 98% of them said yes. Then they asked the other question, do you think you personally are at risk? The older investors, 10% said yes. And for the children, 24% said yes. So we can't get through that wall of it's not going to ever happen to me. And that survey is really interesting if you want to go online and read it. So what we need is awareness. So what we need is media. And today I'm really happy to give the media award to Aaron Vedlin from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Come on up. So Aaron has a lot going on. Aaron writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer, but she's also written for Barron's, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, and the Moscow Times. Tell us about that.
You don't want to know.
She mentioned Vladimir somebody before we came up. I didn't know what she was talking about. So she's done a great job in our issues. And you know, all these issues are related. So when Erin writes about NORCs, or naturally occurring retirement communities, or she works about investing clubs, these are all preventative elder abuse things, and we're really thrilled about that. Erin is also an author, written 2 books. Second person in the country to call out Bernie Madoff in an article as a fraudster, and wears a badge of honor that she was called by Mr. Madoff that idiot woman from Barron's. So that's a badge she can wear proudly forever. And I defend you on that. You don't work for Barron's anymore. So and so we're really thrilled to give Erin this award. Her second book is called Open Secret. So she's written 2 books. I read the Bernie Madoff book. You should read it. It's really good. I haven't read the Open Secret book, but you should read it anyway. Don't bother. I probably couldn't understand it. Let's look at the award. Let's not. So Erin, by the way, Erin last month, earlier this month at the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day event in Washington, also got an award for local coverage of these issues from the National Institute on Elder Financial Exploitation. So this is her award. Oh, we gotta get a picture.
Thank you very much.
Take it away.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So after I met Linda Mill in the early 2000s, the second person I met was Mike Cullen, who gets our Financial Service Industry Award this year. And Mike has been with us from the beginning. Mike's been with a bunch of institutions since I met him, right? But he's been the president of the Delaware Valley Security Officers Group. And why that's important is he opened up his group to us, to me, way back in the early 2000s. So I could come to the group, then me, and talk about dementia, mild cognitive impairment, and lately loneliness and isolation, and all the different research that's coming out. So we grew, and today our financial exploitation specialist, Rhonda Hill, who's over there, Rhonda, still goes to the meeting quarterly. So, you know, one of the reasons people always ask, how come you and Philly have been so far ahead on this and have been doing this forever? Because we have this partnership. And Mike has been at the forefront of that and supports us in every single way, and has, you know, and does this because it's the right thing to do, and it's really a pleasure for me to honor Mike today.
Must be you, Mike.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with Joe over the years. And he's not going to really retire, right? He's still around. And it was a real pleasure meeting him and Linda. And together, we actually put in an elderly abuse program at Sovereign Bank at the time, which was a model that we still kind of use. And I think, Carl, you were there then too. It was an uphill battle, but we finally got it in. All right? Just keep up the good work, whatever you do.
It's my pleasure now. When you saw the invitation, you noticed a notice of a new guide that's come out, the ABA's guide, Adult Protective Services working with law enforcement financial institutions. And I'm thrilled today to have Corey Carlisle, who's the executive director of the ABA Foundation, here to talk a little bit about the guide. It's newly published, and we're really proud of it and excited that Corey could join us today.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. Joe, thank you to the task force for inviting me here today. For those of you aren't knowledgeable about the American Bankers Association, as the name implies, it's a trade association of America's banks of all sizes and charters across the country. I oversee the nonprofit arm of the ABA. It's now 94 years old. The mission of the ABA Foundation is around helping the industry better serve their customers and the places where they live. And about 3 years ago, recognizing this growing threat and hearing from wonderful bankers and our members about this growing threat to our elderly populations and our customers, we launched a campaign called Safe Banking for Seniors. And it has grown beyond it really did hopefully meet a need. I think we were onto something. We now have over 1,000 banks that are members of our Safe Banking for Seniors campaign, 44 state bank associations, including the Pennsylvania Bankers Association, that are championing this effort with us. It has been a tremendous ride. I'm grinning from ear to ear today, not because of this unfortunately sad issue that brings us all together, but mostly because I wasn't, this is the first time I've talked to the task force, but I'm just impressed to see and hear so many of the stories of our bankers that are working in multidisciplinary teams. And in fact, I'm here to present to you today, hopefully some resources and guides that will help you in this work, both the bankers in the room and the nonprofit, the law enforcement, APS, different organizations that are coming together to really thwart this problem. One of the things we heard as we started getting into this campaign for Safe Banking for Seniors is that there was all this great research and anecdotal, much like one of your earlier panelists clearly pointed out that 2.9 is clearly a figure that is not, well, it's a great research paper that everyone can trust. We know the problem is much bigger. But we also have really never had a chance to survey banks on their perspectives. And so actually in this particular room, our friend Larry in the back, who organized this amazing event here at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia around these issues. We did a survey of 103 banks of all different types and sizes about, one, to kind of socialize and understand this particular customer demographic. Interesting note in here, we found that the median or average age of a bank customer is in their mid-50s. It is going down, and we love our millennials, everyone's kind of focused on them. But we found that over 2/3 of the bank deposits are held by that population and older. So this is clearly a vulnerable population with a lot of money in our deposits. So I know our advocates have been making that, but we've never really kind of had a number to point to, so now you do. I hope you'll point to that. One of the other things we found in that study, we asked bankers about what they're doing. There's some great resources here. It's aba.com/seniors. By the way, this is actually the last printed copy I have of this report. It went like hotcakes, and they're expensive to print. Anyway, but that's another thing. We found when we asked our bankers who they're turning to when there's a problem, high percentage, something like 80-some%, either because of local national regulations, they're turning to their partners at law enforcement and adult protective services when there's an issue. But when we asked bankers who they're turning to in a proactive manner, who are they going out and talking to in a proactive manner around financial education, doing community outreach, that number was only around, it's like 30% or so. Actually, we're forming partnerships. They were working with a lot of community groups. We were seeing a lot of things you might expect to see, but in a proactive manner, we weren't seeing this. So we thought, here's an amazing opportunity. And of course, as we met and talked with Joe and others at the National Adult Protective Services Association, we talked to law enforcement, there was clearly a difference, some real and some perceived issues about working together, right? There was perceptions about what it meant to work with APS, whether they had the resources, whether the banks even had the ability to work with them in some jurisdictions. And likewise, I was hearing a frustration from law enforcement and APS on where are the access points to the banks? How can we work in a proactive manner? So that led to a guide that we produced that Joe so kindly introduced, and there's copies. I did bring some copies. I didn't have enough for the whole room, but again, it's aba.com/seniors. This was actually just released 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, about a week before World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, thanks to Joe and other folks who helped collaborate with us on creating this guide. It's not meant to just be a report that lands like a thud on your desk. Actually online, there's things you can print out. It lists all the different state statutes that govern what you can and can't do in sharing information. It has, we love infographics, how to effectively file SARS, right? How to work with APS, the typical process. All that is in this hopefully very helpful guide. And one of the reasons I'm grinning ear to ear, and I just loved the previous panel. Linda, Noel, you'll be happy to know on page 13, there is a huge cutout where a banker from Montecito, California is talking about the importance of preserving video surveillance. I'm just grinning ear to hear those things. So clearly I think we captured some really good best practices in here, and I hope you'll check out this guide. Finally, on a last note, if you're looking for a banker to come in to your organization to talk about how does spot signs work together, we have a new way to pair you with any of those 1,000 banks that are signed up for State Banking for Seniors. It's called FinEdLink. You just make a request, let us know, we'll find a banker to come into your group. So if you're looking to expand your partnerships with banks, a lot of you have relationships already, but if you're looking for more, please go to FinEdLink and we'll match you. Thank you.
So just one more note, if you're a financial institution and you aren't a member of the task force, in your bag is a paper with, and you can with my email on it. So you can either just send me an email, or if you want to fill it out today and leave it with me, leave it on the table, I'll pick it up. Chris, unless I'm taking over, I guess I am. I'll be on Fox 29 tonight at 6. But until then, we have a break. So how long is it? 15 minutes, wow. 15-minute break. And we'll be back for the next great panel.
Things back up, thanks again. For our second panel, I'd like to, for the title, Best Practices for Financial Institutions. We have some people in the security and the fraud investigations realm of what you do as bankers. I'm going to introduce, sorry Mike, first of all, talk about elder, I got my glasses, I'm constantly on and off, getting old I guess. For our second panel, please welcome Linda Johnson, Compliance Officer and Fraud Investigator with Arden Credit Union. Yes. Mike Cullen, you've heard of one of our award recipients today. He's president of the Delaware Valley Financial Security Officers Group. Michael, thank you. John Hickey, Vice President, Senior Investigator with BNY Mellon. And William Mahoney, from a partner with Stradley, Roman, Stevens & Young. Yeah. Wide disciplines here. They're going to start, Mike, I think we'll start with you, right?
Thank you. We're here today to represent different size and types of banks. Linda's with a credit company, I'm with a retail bank, and Jack with a brokerage investment. Sorry. And we want to share with you some of the things that we're looking at and discuss with you some situations. And I noticed there's some other bankers here too. You want to jump in, please feel free. Okay. Since I've been doing this, and we can dwell on the stats, but I can just tell you by just looking at the workload that I have, I'm sure we all have, that the cases involving elderly abuse have skyrocketed and continue to grow. And we're always trying to come up with a different scheme or technique to kind of reduce any losses or exposures. And right now I'm working for a small bank, and I like the best practices scenario that we put together because in many respects, a lot of the banks already have that in place, but it's kind of in increments, growing stages. And part of the reason I'm here and work with Joe and the group is that we want to keep the awareness of what's happening in public, and we also want to use their resources to help train our staff. At DNB First, where I work at present, we put heavy emphasis on training our staff. We're constantly picking people off at the teller window or either back office in the loan department or in the water department, where folks are just fall for the stupidest things, and we get caught trying to help them out. And that's quite different in some of the larger banks, where you don't have as much personal contact as you would in something at our size. But for example, I brought with me today Don Edberg, who heads our wire department. And I asked her to come just to give a couple examples of some things she caught. And a lot of that has to do with what I call personal training and being aggressive and not being afraid to ask questions, okay? A lot of places went ahead and did these transactions because they're too busy and just want to get through the day. But we really emphasize push to be aggressive in terms of if you don't think it's right, it probably isn't. So, Donna, you can just give a couple examples of what happened and what we did.
Okay. So I have 3 examples here. One was a wire for $7,800. It was an older woman. She was. I'm new to speaking in front of people. So. She's approximately 70 years old, and first thing was she called me, and she wanted to do a wire. She wasn't quite sure about it, and that to me right away is a red flag, when somebody doesn't understand what they're doing. So I asked her for her account number, and she didn't have an account with us. So I didn't tell her we couldn't do the wire, I asked more questions. When I asked questions, I asked her if she knew who she was sending the money to. And she said she was sending it for a friend. So then I asked, how long have you known this friend? And it hadn't been for a long period of time. Did you meet them on the internet? And I explained, when you meet somebody, usually sometimes it's on the internet, and they'll ask you eventually to borrow money, to loan them money, things like that. Her reply was no, but we'll go further, and you'll find out she actually had met him on the internet. She said he was a friend and a contractor, and he had his own business. So I said, well, if he has his own business, why is he borrowing money from you? She was quiet, she's thinking about that, and she didn't answer me right away. And I told her I thought it was a fraud, that she was being scammed, that she should talk to her son, if she had a son, a daughter, niece, nephew, a family member, somebody, that I really did not feel that this was legitimate. And she said, well, she wanted to keep it confidential. I said, did he tell you to keep it confidential? And she said, no. I said, well, does anybody know him? She said, no. Well, if they don't know him, then it's kind of confidential. And she thought about it, and she goes, well, I guess you're right. So I stressed again that she needed to talk to her family. Several days later, she called me back, and it was fraud. She hadn't sent the money. I had told her we couldn't do the wire. She thanked me. She called me back, and I was so glad she did. Not usually one that gets moved real easily, but I was so glad she didn't send that money. She looked further into it, and he was, actually the internet picture was the person's father. So this was a younger person who posted his father's picture. And she had met him on the internet. She had lied to me. She didn't want to tell me. I guess she was embarrassed. Her husband had passed away, a couple years ago, and she was lonely, she said. She also, I told her, you don't want to open up any emails, and I went into that. She had opened an email, and her internet had been compromised. I told her, also when you talk about notifying police and going further, I told her she should call the police, and she was hesitant. And I said, well, they need to know what's going on in their community. They need to know about this. And she said, well, I've told my friends. I said, that's great. You also need to go to the police. And I would talk about this with all of your friends and let them know. So that was one. The other one was about $1,800 wire. The woman was around 60 years old. And again, she called and she wasn't quite sure about a wire in the process. And once I heard that, I started asking questions. Did she know the person she was sending the money to? She didn't know who they were. I asked, well, why was she sending money to somebody she didn't know? It was to pay insurance. Do you have insurance? I kept asking questions. No, she didn't have insurance. I said, well, why are you paying money for something you don't have? And she said, well, it was to pay for money she had won. It was for contest for something. I told her, well, you shouldn't have to pay money to win money. And I thought it was a scam. She told me she'd give them her credit card number also. So I then told her, you need to call your credit card company immediately, close the card down. I asked which branch was closest to her. She told me, I said, you need to get there immediately, close the account, open a new one. I proceeded to call the branch, and then I also called her probably 3 times before she got to the branch to make sure she was listening to me, and she went to the branch. She closed her card, she closed the account, and actually while she was at the branch, the fraudsters did call to try and get the money from her. But I guess they realized they weren't getting it. The other one was $45,000, but that was an incoming wire. Man was approximately 64 years old, and the account hadn't been open too long. When a wire comes in and I see an account's not open too long, I look further at the account. I actually go in, I look at the transactions on the account. And this wire was being sent from a business to his personal account. So I looked at his account, his job, his pay, and everything. Then when I looked, I saw that there had been a wire previously for about $5,700. And immediately after that wire went in, he withdrew $1,000 increments at Walmart. Bought cards, something at Walmart. So that was a big red flag. I Google addresses. I really go into it besides looking at the account. So I Googled his address. Well, maybe he owns this company or something, owns a company. Maybe there's a reason why this is coming in. But based on, it wasn't a wealthy area when I looked. It didn't justify this wire coming in. And when I looked at what his pay was, didn't justify the wire. So we held the wire, we stopped it. We didn't receive it, and I contacted the bank with a service message. And they got back to me the next day. We did return the wire, and apparently the business email had been hacked. And that's how we got the wire. So, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Donna. And the reason I asked Donna to share those stories with me, not a whole lot of dollar amounts, but the point is that you have to be aggressive, and that's why we keep telling our staff, if you have a question for you, call me, The more proactive you are, the more likely you're going to be able to stop some fraud. We're currently working on a situation with a lady who fell in love with somebody overseas. She wants to send $10,000. Sometimes it can be very difficult. But most of our branches in Chester County, we work with Chester County Adult Protection Services who get involved with most of our things. The other thing we like to do, like I said, a big emphasis on training, and it usually starts with new employee training, and then we have an annual training session with everybody in the bank. And we're hoping to improve upon that, so instead of taking a test on a computer screen about general questions regarding security, we want to expand that and have some in-person sessions too, which includes elderly abuse. But one of the things that I think is very important from my experiences in terms of elderly abuse is banks have to get more involved with the adult protection services and their activities, take advantage of the training, and really develop, as the best practices say, develop in-house specialists for anybody in the bank to go to who suspects there's an elderly abuse problem. I know that sometimes that's not very popular because everybody wants to reduce costs, reduce personnel, but we have to deal with this epidemic of elderly abuse. And the best way to do that is through training and through working with adult protection services, and of course with the task force. So that's one of the things that we're shooting for, and that's part of our goals. We'll talk about
Okay, what I wanted to go over real quick is
Ardent Credit Union, we're pretty small. We have we have a few branches. Most of them are in GSK facilities, so we're not as widely available as some banks. However, we are in the next couple of years going to be having more branches. So we're right now reorganizing, and we want to get our policies in place. And if you're not familiar with credit unions, we have a board of directors. We have a meeting every month, and I met with them and my boss. We talked to them about this issue, and they're very behind us. They wanted to know what they could do. We report any kind of issues we have to them each month, so they really stay in touch. And that's a good part of the credit union, is that we're smaller, so a lot of our employees know their members, and they know what's normal, they know, they can talk to them, a lot of them are friends, they see them all the time. So that's one advantage we have, being a smaller institution. I know the banks, can't check every account, but I have the advantage of looking at ATM deposits every day and wires every day and mobile deposits. We're seeing a lot of those that are fraud. But the failed track. So in the folder that they gave you, there's the best practices for financial institutions. I just had a quick question. How many financial institution people here are from financial institutions? If you raise your hand. And how many have an actual written policy on elder fraud and how to handle it? That's pretty good. So I'm just going to go over some of the things that I've used in the past, and I just have to say that I learned a lot from Linda Mills and listening to her for years, not just here. She's been involved in a lot of organizations, a lot of ICI seminars that she's given, and so I take information from everyone else and I use it. And if you're not involved in the task force, it'd be very helpful to join, because you learn a lot, and especially from the University of Pennsylvania, the doctors. You really learn about the brain and how to speak, to maybe have conversations rather than just ask simple questions. You have to really get in-depth conversation to learn about some of this fraud. So what we did, we created a intranet form. Now, when we call the PCA on hotline, we have a few questions they ask us. So what we did was we created the form so that the teller who felt something was suspicious could fill that out and have all the information ready for us, so that when we get the form, then I can look over the account and I can say, okay, why do you think something is wrong with this account? Well, let's just say the person's coming in more often, they have this unknown person with them. So we've created training for all the tellers to let them know this is the form you fill out, and you just send a referral. This way, they don't have to call, they don't have to feel, sometimes they feel like they're intrusive and they're asking too many questions. This way they can send it to us, we'll take care of it, we'll talk to them in a different setting too. They don't have to stand at the teller line talking to the person. Let's see, we go through, we ask them if there's a change in the appearance. Again, is there anyone with the member that doesn't normally come in with the member? At Ardent, it's weird, but we don't give out cash withdrawals, so we're lucky there. However, that just changes it to ATM withdrawals, the wires, and we also have shared branching, which they can go to another credit union and make withdrawal. So we still have to worry about the money getting out. It's kind of harder if they're not coming to our branch to withdraw the cash. So the training of frontline staff is important, because our managers were made aware that take the person, sit them in the manager's office. We don't want to be asking questions in front of everyone. I feel a lot of people feel uncomfortable, like, why are you asking me this? There's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine, I know what I'm doing. So we take them separately, we have conversations. We also train our call center. If they get a phone call, there's lots of times where, like, the person impersonating someone calls on the phone, or they have someone else on the phone and they say, oh, can you tell my grandson my balance of my account? They're trained, okay, you have to let us know when this happens, because then we'll review the account, we'll look for anything else that's suspicious. We have caller ID, we're looking for the phone number they're calling from, is it different than what they have? Is it somebody else calling in, and what information do they have? If we have somebody else call in, we're shutting the account and we're blocking it immediately until we get in touch with the member. A lot of times we have innocently, maybe the daughter or son are really helping out, they think they can call and pretend to be the person. So, you know, until we find out if they're truly helping or not, we'll freeze up the account, block the cards and everything until we contact the person. If we can't get in touch with them by phone, and in your case, it probably wouldn't help, but we'll send a certified letter out to the person to see if we can get them to respond by mail. We send through email, so we don't just use one form of communication just in case somebody's answering their phone. Then we review the activity for the past couple of months, it's a little different, almost different. As far as the training, we do training in person. We talk about all the different scams. Some of the reason I'll speed up here a bit, but as far as like victims, I've had everyone from a retired accountant, recently the PhD. So it's not just, you know, poor people or uneducated people that are getting scammed. We've had everyone, college graduates to non-college graduates. Recent case, we had a woman who, she had a PhD and she received a phone call saying she won the lottery. She was so happy because she had other issues, money issues, and they told her to open an account with someone else. She was supposed to take money from her account with us, deposit it into this account. They gave her multiple contacts and phone numbers, told her to call them. They would call and they would give her like codes and numbers. Then they had her making payments on her credit card. And in the end, it was a bust out scheme, basically, because they were putting bad money into her account, and then she was withdrawing it and paying her fees and taxes, and she was out a few $1,000s, a lot of money. And she didn't have money, again, to begin with. So, and she was very intelligent. She, like I said, she had a PhD, and she wasn't that old. So she just felt, you know, her husband had died, and I find this in a lot of the victims we have. If an older member comes in and their spouse dies, that happens a lot, and then they get lonely, and sometimes they don't care. They just want someone to talk to them. And they want the company. I had a woman tell me that. She said, I don't care if he's getting my money. I have someone to talk to and he makes me happy every day. And she lost thousands of dollars by sending it to him. We had a grandmother who received a phone call. And same thing, they told her that her nephew was in jail in Philadelphia, he was arrested. And they needed money to get him out. And I said, well, when was he arrested? She said, today. I said, well, that doesn't usually happen. You don't get out of jail that quick in Philadelphia. You're not getting out of jail today. And her relative, I think it was her son-in-law, was a Philadelphia police officer. I said, call him right now. This is a scam. Don't give anyone any money. I said, how are they picking you up? She said, they're going to come to my house and pick you up. He said, well, I said, call the police and tell them what's going on, because she said, okay, I'll call you back. And I said, well, where's your nephew live? He lived down the street. I said, I bet he's sleeping. I said, does he work nights? She called me back, she said, yeah, he was sleeping. And luckily, she didn't give out the money, and that her relative police officer, was letting her know, like, this is a scam, don't give out any money. But we've had several people related to law enforcement that have also been victims of scams. So I'm gonna wind this up really short. When we have conversations with people, especially in the financial institutions, we can't just be robots conducting transactions. We have to get involved, and we have to have conversations, and it's a service to them, and that's what I always tell our employees. You're not getting into their business, you're helping them and you're letting them know, because a lot of people, some people want to be involved in scams, some people don't. If they don't want to, you need to give them this information so they know that they can decide are they being ripped off or not. Because by the time we get the large withdrawals, these people have been speaking with these con artists for months, and they're brainwashed. And they will lie to us, they lie to the police, they will lie to family members, they don't even talk to family members sometimes. I've had cases where they don't even want to talk to their grandkids or anyone, they're gonna continue to talk to the scam artists. So, just to wrap it up, that's about it. So we take it, it is very important to us, this topic, and we do intend to train our employees, new employees on a regular basis and keep them updated on all the scams. So, thanks.
Jeff?
Push this button.
Yeah.
There's one thing I learned, you're supposed to speak up here, push the button. So anyway, good morning, everyone. My name's John Hickey, or Jack, as I go by. I'm with Bank of New York Mellon. So even though we have bank in our name, we're not a retail bank. We service the investment world. We provide the total service for the investment cycle. And we, again, basically are very concerned about this ongoing problem, not only in the United States, but globally, because we are a global company. The three divisions in my world that basically experience this problem the most would be our broker-dealer services, Pershing, private wealth, which is part of Dreyfus, and then basically investor services or our transfer agency world. As a company, we service over 300 mutual fund companies. We process their day-to-day transactions. We take care of all their tax accounting and reporting, issue statements, take in purchases, liquidate funds from the account on behalf of the shareholder. So we're a little bit of a different beast when it comes to this problem. Again, basically, especially in the mutual fund world, over 70% of the shareholder base is elderly. They're mutual fund products. And so again, we approach this problem two-pronged, just like everybody else up here has stated. We attempt to train our employees to the best of our ability to raise their awareness. And then, again, basically we do our best to attempt to prevent anything that we deem suspicious. Now again, basically we run into some roadblocks at Bank of New York Mellon because in the mutual fund world, we don't own that account. We don't own that relationship with that account holder. That client does. So again, basically, even though we're the partner behind the scenes, we have 4 call centers for most of the mutual fund clients. We are the voice of that company for their shareholders. And when they call in, even though they might think they're speaking to a representative from Prime America or Edward Jones, they're actually speaking to a Bank of New York Mellon employee that's servicing that client. So again, we run into some difficult situations. The bottom line for us is training is the #1 key for us as a company in attempting to basically slow this problem down. Training is not mandatory for any of our employees in any of our divisions at this time. But we have over 6 online classes that can be taken by the employees when they're doing their training cycles. Corporate investigations and security, at least once a year, we'll go out to these 3 divisions I mentioned and do face-to-face training for elderly abuse in the financial world, attempt to heighten the awareness of the employees that basically come into contact with the potential problem on a daily basis. And we also do special training for our call center reps to heighten their awareness on basically when is deemed a suspicious inbound call from a shareholder that may be a senior citizen. The other part of the puzzle that basically we always stress with our employees at Bank of New York Mellon is, if you think it's suspicious, then you have to report it. We have an online gateway for the employees to do their incident reports. Incident reports come right into corporate investigations and are assigned to an investigator within 24 hours. The investigator will work that case again within 5 business days and get preliminary information. And then basically the case is also reviewed by a legal team out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania called the Suspicious Activity Reporting Team and our legal folks. And they basically dissect the case to basically see if there is a potential exposure to a senior citizen for financial loss due to fraud or a fraud attempt. If they basically deem it to be suspicious for a senior citizen, they will end up notifying the client, or they will also do voluntary reporting to FinCEN. from SAR reports. Just one other thing to mention, and again, basically, we're a little different because we are a third-party processor for these clients. A lot of times when we escalate things, we escalate to the client, give them all the details, give them all the information, and then it's up to them what next steps they're going to take to act. But in the broker-dealer world, FINRA has been real strong in the last couple of years in passing numerous new regulations to help seniors. The number one regulation they passed probably that's going to have the most impact that is still being implemented by us is the trusted contact rule. And that again, basically, we reach out to the shareholders that basically are seniors, ask them for a trusted person that can be added to the account. That person can't act on the account or sign anything, but basically that person can call in and get information on transactions on the account, and also basically it's a point person for us to call out and contact. So that's one in the last couple of years, that's one of the most helpful rules that FINRA has passed. The other rule that FINRA passed recently for broker dealers is if, again, basically we feel this request for redemption or liquidation on the account is suspicious, we can refuse to do the transaction and put a hold on the account for 15 days, and then an incident report is filed, and basically we investigate with the client to see what's going on with the shareholder and if everything is okay with that. And again, basically, there's two things that basically, again, more tools in your toolkit, basically help you, again, discover if there is a problem with the account holder. So again, just like everybody else up here so far has said, back in your common fields, training and reporting is the best way to go. And again, basically that's what we concentrate on. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you. I thought about asking Chris not to do that because he was so.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm on the panel. Again, my name is Bill Mahoney. I'm an attorney with Stratton Ronan here in town. And I do a lot of securities litigation and enforcement work. I'm going to pick up where Jack left off, hopefully with some happier news, and under the heading of additional tools that you all will have going forward. 2018 has been a bit of a watershed year in terms of both improved regulation and most recently improved laws that provide a lot of protection for folks who, in a heavily regulated industry, where you have sometimes competing interests in terms of what you want to do, and you may have a client or someone influencing a client that doesn't really want that done, it really helps these new regulations and laws that really help this year. So Jack mentioned the first one. FINRA actually announced that a year ago in February they implemented 2 additional rules. The first is Rule 4512, which is the trusted contact rule. Prior to February of this year, broker-dealers were not required to have anybody on the account. And in fact, unless you had specific permission from the account holder, you were not allowed to discuss anything about that account with anyone. So the trusted contact rule requires firms to make reasonable efforts to have new account holders identify a trusted contact. Reasonable efforts really means asking, but a lot of firms, I'm sure Jack's the same way, they're much more robust about it, and it's certainly, of all the firms we deal with, it's certainly part of the new account packet and application. Assuming that person identifies a trusted contact, the goal of that, as Jack said, is to have basically another set of eyes and ears. So if your financial advisor on the account has a concern about transactions or anything going on within the account, both in terms of requested distributions or kind of nutty investment ideas, they now have the authority to go to that trusted contact and discuss with them not just a particular transaction, but in a more holistic sense. Mrs. Jones called me today and said she wants to transfer $100,000 out of her account. How's her health? How's her mental health? And really get a feel for who that person is and what's going on in his or her life. So that's really a significant improvement. For existing clients, and firms have, you don't have to get a trusted contact, but when you do your updating of accounts and account information in your normal course of business, then you are required then to make reasonable attempts to get a trusted contact. The only requirement, by the way, for the trusted contact is that it be a natural person over the age of 18. You can imagine that just having a trusted contact doesn't mean it's a trusted contact. There are all sorts of scenarios where just because you're over 18 doesn't mean you know a damn thing about investing or what's good for somebody. But it definitely is a step in the right direction. The other rule that Jack mentioned was Rule 2165, the financial exploitation of specified adults. And interestingly, specified adults, I think it was largely drafted with seniors in mind. It's a person who's age 65 or older, but also includes somebody who's 18 years of age or older, whom the firm reasonably believes has a mental or physical impairment that renders them unable to protect their own interests. So it's not just about seniors, it's about other vulnerable adults. And in that case, again, none of this is mandatory. It allows the firms the flexibility to do this. In that case, if the firm believes that there's a requested distribution, either of cash or securities, out of the account, okay? If something remains within the account, this rule doesn't apply. But when money or assets are leaving an account, if the firm has a good faith belief that financial exploitation is underway, then the firm has the ability to place that transaction on hold. Okay, now, there are a series of things that a firm has to do there once you place the transaction on hold. Within 2 business days, they have to notify the account holder and the trusted contact that they placed the transaction on hold and the reasons why they placed it on hold. Okay? The exception there is that they believe the trusted contact is the person who's exploiting the account holder. In that case, obviously, they're not going to notify, they don't have to notify that person. The firm then has to immediately initiate an internal review of the facts and circumstances to satisfy itself whether, in fact, financial exploitation is taking place or not. The hold expires after 15 days unless a law enforcement agency or other protective agency requests that it continue. And the firm, if its internal investigation warrants, the firm can extend it for another 10 days. And the whole goal here is to give the firm, roughly 25 days or so, which ought to be plenty of time in most instances, to really dig into it and make a good faith determination as to whether there's some exploitation going on or not. Again, as you might imagine, it sounds simple, but if you have somebody on the other end of that line saying, look, it's my account, it's my money, I don't care about my kids, I'm giving it to Joe Stevenson, who I met last week, right, because he's a really good guy and he needs the money. It's a tough tension there. And I think you all have to expect that there's going to be some fallout and you're going to lose some accounts, right? Nobody wants to lose accounts. I think most people act in good faith. But believe me, if you don't do it then, you know what happens as soon as Mrs. Jones dies, right? Mrs. Jones' kids come in and say, how the hell did you let this happen? And now you got a lawsuit where you're almost certain that you pay money. So it's good practice. The other nice thing about that rule is that if you follow all of those steps, you're getting safe harbor in terms of potential responsibility for violating other FINRA rules that relate to privacy, transfer of assets, et cetera. So that's that's a good one. Again, firms are not required to do any of this, but I think that the barely unspoken message here is, don't do it at your peril, because particularly in this dynamic, no one's going to shed a tear for a financial services firm that doesn't take steps to protect elderly investors. And again, it doesn't apply to transactions within the account. So if an elderly person comes in and says, you know what, I heard about this Bitcoin thing, it sounds really awesome, take my 500 grand and buy Bitcoin. Right? There are a whole host of other reasons not to do that, but these rules don't apply to that. And one other thing, you have to be careful. If you do place a hold on a transaction, it has to be done on a transaction by transaction basis. For example, if someone says I want to transfer $5,000 out of my account, but you know that every month they're having money taken out of the account to pay utility bills, whatever it may be, you can't freeze the entire account. Okay, you have to really isolate each transaction and make a determination, is that transaction suspicious or not? I think probably the most impressive piece of legislation on this just came out a few weeks ago. President Trump signed into Act on May 24th, the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act. And as Senator Casey's representative mentioned earlier, within that is the Senior Safe Act 2017, which perhaps not surprisingly garnered widespread and bipartisan support. That provision provides the greatest amount of protection because that provision says, provided you give your people adequate training, and provided that you as an institution or one of your folk, one of your FAs, or even, by the way, this doesn't only apply, I should make this clear, this doesn't only apply to the investment world. This covers banks, it covers credit unions. It basically covers all financial institutions. So it's really broad-based. But assuming you give adequate training and assuming there is a good faith belief that financial exploitation is underway, you can then make a referral to the appropriate authorities, whether it be legal or adult protective services, and you are entirely immune from liability, civil and administrative, which is a huge thing because, as you all know, like I said earlier, you want to do the right thing, but there's always that fear that in doing the right thing, you've crossed some line, you violated some privacy protection, you've done something, or, God forbid, even with good faith, you're wrong, right? Because that can happen too. This piece of legislation goes a long, long way to, or should go a long way to giving you all comfort that, again, you have to have adequate training, and that may be the devil in the details here, but there are plenty of resources out there that you can go to get that training. So that's actually, I think, a good happy note for me to end on.
Thank you to all our panelists. Linda, Mike, Jack, William. I think if we learned one thing through this panel, we buy Bitcoin. Is that what I got from that? No?
Or
All right.
find somebody who you know that has money.
Have them buy the Bitcoin for you. Well, thank you. We do want to open it up not only to these panelists, but Linda, Noelle, and Dana too. You were so good. I don't know why you're not up here. Does anyone have any questions? We have this host of talent and knowledge up here. If we want to open it up to questions from anyone. Way back here. If you could just say your name, where you're from, and direct the question to whoever you'd like to direct it to.
Hello, good afternoon. Larry Santucci from the Federal Reserve here. The first bullet up there says develop data analytics. I don't know if Linda, if that's something you could talk about, but could you tell us a little bit more, specifically in your capacity with your organization, on what exactly you mean by data analytics? What does that mean to you?
That would be our reports that we receive. Let me just read this real quick. Yeah, we would review, we have reports we review.
Gotta do my job.
We have actually a case system that creates alerts for different kinds of fraud. So we would have, say, debit card fraud, Visa transactions, ATM transactions, excessive wires, excessive cash withdrawals, and we receive alerts on a daily basis that we can change to what, depending on like maybe newer accounts, older accounts, anything like that. So we do have a lot of reports that we run to point out activity on accounts that, and this is probably general practice for everyone, to just make the fraudulent activity more clear to us, that we can review those first. So that would be the data analytics, just to create, you can create your own reports with our IT system, or like I said, we have a software system and a case management system that we use where we can create cases and we can manage any kind of alert that we want to create as far as transactions go.
Any other questions?
Linda and Mike, because you see the same, our seniors have patterns. So they get their social security the first to the third of the month or what have you. You're in the front lines. If you're a smaller company or a smaller bank, you're seeing them. Even if it doesn't have financial exploitation, but my second example, if she came in the bank like she did all the time in the Center City branch of her bank, and you saw her using like as socks, paper towels, would you then have anything in place to say like she's disheveled, she has stains on her clothing, she's not looking malnourished? Like, would you still say that's an adult protective service call to Jennifer and Joe and get that in, or do you only get involved in this when it comes to financial fraud?
I've never really had any of those.
Now,
I can't tell you I've had any of those cases.
we advise our tellers. That's what we consider a red flag. And we would advise them to report that to the security department. And the security department then would contact ABS.
Thank you.
It happens a lot.
Right, because you're gonna see them each month.
Right.
Thank you.
That's all right. That's what I'm here for. I'm getting my steps in.
Hi, everybody. Maureen Matson from Lincoln Financial. Really appreciate all the panelists. And one question I had is, I always try to find out how other people are doing what we're trying to do. And one of the presentations we had at another conference, I thought it was a really good idea that they had all the scams in one folder. Because I think someone, Linda, I think it was you mentioned earlier, that sometimes you're with, or actually, I'm sorry, I think it was, Donna. The woman, I think you explained that the customer was so adamant that nobody was taking advantage of her. And, you're walking through that these scams exist. The technique that I learned at one of the other conferences is showing the workbook, and it's basically word for word the exact scam that the customer may be experiencing. We have tried to do that within our field. I just want to see if any of the panels we've had so far have utilized that technique, what the success was, and do you use it the same way I just described as a workbook, or is it, how else do you get the technique out to show your exact process that you're trying to defend right now is in black and white a scam that is known to this entire community?
So we do. What I do is refer them to the FTC website that lists all those type of scams, and encourage them to read them. And the case we're working on right now, we're doing that exact thing.
Will they do that?
Sometimes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm running into, that we have these online resources, but when they are so adamant, we had this case, she was buying a taxi driver a car to be her personal chauffeur. I mean, it actually sounded like a great investment opportunity for a woman that was on a fixed income to enter into this business. And we always have to be careful because of the way we're set up, giving legal counsel, et cetera. But it was one of those things that kept me up at night that, I'm saying, I actually found it written, almost the exact business plan. I said, show her this, but then it looks like we created it. So I would really like to hear, because a lot of times we can direct them to the websites. I don't think they're going. It's an uphill battle sometimes.
It is. We stay in constant contact with, and if it gets to the point where they insist on doing it, we'll close an account out. We won't do it, and that really irritates a lot of people. But I've experienced those folks come back 6 months, a year later, saying you were right, sorry, but they're the ones that lost. And makes us feel bad because we couldn't keep it.
There's a good article called Are You Real? We got that through the task force. I think Joe handed it out. The AARP, it was in one of their magazines a couple of years ago. And it's a story of the scam artist explaining how it was his job to train people to be con artists and what they have to say and what they should say and who they should pick on. And I usually print that out and send it to them. I've used Dr. Phil's website. I printed out stories from there. And I said, go see Dr. Phil. And I just print out like papers and papers and papers from multiple websites, and I mail it out, and I just keep mailing them out information so they see it's not just me saying it, it's in writing.
We see it on the criminal side too, where then it becomes a report. Like Donna was saying earlier, if it's someone from a different country, you can see how they're definitely using a translator on these messages on Facebook and things of that nature. And it's not how you would speak if you were typing a text or writing a message. And when you start to show them that, because like Donna said and a lot of the other panelists too, the person's spouse died, they're lonely, they want someone to spend time with, or they think that they're a veteran and it's somebody else's picture. They're using a picture and it's somebody else, you need to send me this money, or the one that we had, and once we brought her down, they were sending her receiving stolen property, like iPhones. Then they wanted her to ship these iPhones to someplace else, but she was at home recovering from cancer treatments, and her family thought they'd get her a tablet so that she would have something to do. And then she got a Facebook account, started meeting these people, and all of a sudden she's getting all this stuff delivered to her house, and they're like, "What are you doing?" She's in a massive scam to move this stuff. And she was supposed to ship the phones to Africa. But when we broke down and showed her, this is not how you talk, this is someone translating it, it was exactly what they would always say in the scam, as Linda said, exact same thing. And then she realized it, and that detective knew someone at Secret Service, and then they followed up more on it because it was an international type scam.
Can I just add one thing there, because and it's very illustrative, but we tend to talk in terms of things that are very obvious at the time or after the fact. Sadly, for most of you, it's going to be a lot of gray area, right? And there's nothing wrong with an otherwise healthy, cogent 75-year-old man or woman who wants to write a check to a friend, right? Or whatever. It's their money, and they're entitled to do it. What you absolutely must do is document what you suspect and the steps you're taking. And unfortunately, I'm a lawyer, so I'm, youth the world through lawsuits and liability. That's a critical way to protect yourself and your organizations when something goes south down the road.
So again, I'm Dana Goldberg from Senior Law Center. So what we've changed up in our education pieces, and then what I do sometimes directly with my clients. So YouTube is this wonderful thing that on there, what you can find are the actual sort of, so sometimes they've recorded calls of the perpetrators that have done this. There's also great news reports that we've pulled off where then they have the actual victims talking about, this is what the perpetrator said. That's a lot more effective. Seeing it, hearing what it is, and then what I sometimes, because part of what's going on in the scam part, and then what goes on, and we've learned in our task force, what's happening in the aging brain. They're working together and they're working that. And there's something about the visual and the hearing of what you've been a part of. Or they'll show you on these videos what the screen looks like and what the chat looks like. And something about that, seeing that will trigger, oh my God, that's exactly what they wrote to me. Or that is what the call was. You're telling them, or they're like reading it necessarily in an article. There's still, I think there's something about the brain that keeps that separate. But what I've been noticing is seeing that and using that technique really does have an effect. What you have to know, though, is it takes some time to soak in. So having a 2-minute conversation with the customer, which is what you might only have at that moment, is not going to be enough. I mean, I can tell you a woman who was scammed that I had here on the streets of Philadelphia. It was such an obvious, like, who would ever do this? And her sister had gotten her to us, and she spent 3 hours in my office until she finally had this aha moment that we needed to call the police and what had happened. If you don't have that, then what is the best is to know your community resources. Who are the advocacy organizations? Who is in the senior world that can spend the time with the senior to talk with them because your employees may not have that time, but it does take that time and that personal contact, I think, for the brain to go, oh my God, because you don't want to know that you were a victim. You don't want to know that you kind of did that, you know, you participated in that. So, and then I just want to ask my question, but you don't have to take it right now because there's some other comments, is I just want you to address this SARS report, the fact that it's confidential and that how banks feel like if they do that, that's enough, and what kind of role that's playing in the fact that we're not prosecuting, you know, or getting to the end. But I'll take the answer after. But she had it.
Thanks. Hi, Nancy Hefner, Lincoln Investment. We have clients nationwide, of course, so when we have various elder exploitation cases, we're working with different states and different APS agencies. And I was just wondering if, for instance, you know, there's all this regulation now that allows us to share information with APS agencies and, you know, law enforcement, et cetera, without concern. My frustration has been with me being able to get information back from APS. A lot of APS agencies across the states are bound by a gag order or whatever it is, you know, they can't share, but that makes my investigation on how I'm going to determine what I do next impossible. So is there any anything up front that would allow that sharing to go both ways?
That's a
No.
Can there be?
You know, that's a whole different thing, but look, there's only so much that you can do, right? And you know, for people who are conscientious, like you obviously are, I get the frustration. But as long as, you know, for example, if you're putting the holes in place, right, and you're doing your internal investigation, at the end of the day, you know, Lincoln Financial is not a law enforcement agency. You know, it's not a regulator. So, you know, you can do what you can do, and if you're uncomfortable with things, you can ask the accountant to leave, right? Or continue dialogue with a trusted contact, family members, particularly in the broker-dealer world. You have an obligation to know your client anyway, right? So, and it's good business, and presumably that's the same in the banking world too, that, you know, you want assets to stay at your firm. So you want to develop relationships, so you want to ask about your family and all that stuff. Those things are all helpful, but you know, I'm not aware of anything that requires any agency to communicate back with you, particularly not any particular time frame.
And we have the same problem with banking or confidential. Again, basically, you know, that it would be nice to get feedback, just to get an update, find out what's going on with the shareholder and the account. But again, we have the same problem.
So I can address that a little bit from the national perspective. This has been a problem since the beginning, and you know, when we first started out, and then I worked something out. So you can do things, and the best thing you can do is have relationships and have task force and meet with people. But it's a constant struggle because the most consistent characteristic of APS programs is their variability. And so a lot of them are county-based, and you'll get county by county, but we are trying on the national level. In fact, this very issue, as well as the putting a hold on accounts and asking for it to be extended, are things that are coming up at the national level on the next National Financial Exploitation Advisory Board call, which is next week, because we know how frustrating it is. And I know I've been out there for 15, 18 years telling all APS programs, we're asking the banks, we've been asking for years, you know, the Gramm-Leach-Blyer, there's exceptions, cooperate with us, give us our records, tell us things, and then when they ask you, you're saying, I can't confirm or deny I've ever heard of that person. That's not a partnership. So I've been really trying hard. We have been trying it, and the ones that have successful task force and other things are doing really, really well. And as Bill said in his, when he talked about the specified individuals, you know, most APS programs, again, in the country do 18 and up. Not all, and for instance, in Pennsylvania, it's a bifurcated system. So there's a group of folks who do 60 and older, and a group of folks who do 18 and 59. I'm sure you're gonna get different answers. And they're not the only state that's bifurcated, but it's something that has always been on the agenda and it's reaching ahead, especially with the new FINRA rules, gives us more reason to really talk about these issues. And I'm hoping that this year, the Financial Exploitation Advisory Board is going to put out some guidance on how to handle this. So I share your frustration, sorry for it. But I mean, Linda and I got, we solved that how many years ago? So it can be done, and it is done. And PCA still does it. And we work together, but we've got to get more on board. So thanks for being patient with us.
John Wood, TD Bank. We've had, I want you to bring up, I usually don't need this, but could you discuss a little dirty secret we have in financial institutions, the internal threat? We haven't talked about that today, and I think we've all seen it where they have the most access. They know how to find vulnerable people because they're looking at all the records. Someone tied into data analytics, someone mentioned, one of our cases, Lou had a case, where the suspect was looking for dormant cases, tying them to elderly people, and they don't know they're being hit. So sometime analytics will do a lot of data mining, not us, but our group, looking for inappropriate inquiries into accounts, and then try and marry that up to dormant cases. So we don't find out about it after the fact and it's going on. But have you guys had that same experience?
Well, where I'm at now, we're working on developing some software programs, but we've all had internal problems because a couple different things. You sometimes have tellers who will get into their screens and start mining people's data, then selling that out on the street. Branch managers or other platform people who will look for dormant accounts and start making withdrawals to their own personal account or to other accounts that been set up. That's ongoing. I haven't seen any software programs that specifically zeroes on elderly use, but I'm sure that's being worked on, much like the credit card banks, where they're looking at rhythms of purchases, where they're made and all that, and all of a sudden there's a big spike and you zero in on that. We're trying to develop that in-house, but it's a huge problem. I mean, you don't hear about it a lot because it's internal. And part of that, and just bring this out here and talk to, because I've run into this at several banks that I worked at. Banks, even though I run a group where we share a lot of information, banks typically do not share their dirty laundry with other banks. Ergo, a lot of their bad employees are shared with everybody else. Because when they're caught stealing or doing something inappropriate, rather than having them arrested, they will fire them and try to recover funds. So what happens is, I got fired, I stole, I didn't get arrested, I paid money back, but then I can go to another bank. And when they ask you, have you ever been arrested? No. So that kind of just clears you. I've run into this 4 or 5 times. Big money, and it's a huge problem that we, as bankers, have to address separately. But it happens, and you're right, it can happen to the elderly anytime, particularly accounts that are huge, that there's hardly any activity. It's just interest bearing. So I'm sure that happens to you guys too.
No, not really.
Yeah.
Our specific teller platform, our actual system that the teller uses to perform transactions, if you try to access a dormant account, and I'm not really sure how the length of time, whatever time you want to set, you have to get a supervisor override to do anything, and then there's also a report generated that is reviewed. Like, it's really it's on the top of the list of reports that gets reviewed is dormant account activity. So they do watch that. So specifically for dormant accounts, I haven't seen any of that because they're pretty good at that. Yeah.
Yeah, if I could just add, back in your mail-in, we have 3 programs. The call center environment, if any of the reps access an account, they didn't get a call, a telephone call to handle, It flags that information and the manager gets a report. And then the other thing Bank of New York Mellon does as a company, all external email that employees send outside the bank with attachments, the attachments get scanned and reviewed. So again, basically that's a couple preventative things that we do.
Actually, got a question over here. I guess, not trying to shop a case or anything. We had, it's just a terrible situation. Like I said, my problem is, lots of times when we find out about it, it's already happened. It's already done, and in this particular one case, it's 3 years ago. It happened to be a banker in Philly who took advantage of this woman. The woman lives in Jersey. The fraud took place in Philly, and her caretaker, her nearest, is up in Maine. And the concern is sometimes is how do we get something like that together to get to law enforcement where we really don't, you have an elderly person who's not going to be a particularly good witness. All the video evidence is gone from 3 years ago. But we got a pretty strong accusation. It's just not what she did with our bank. Apparently, obviously he was a banker at another bank. I don't think anybody here right now, I don't know if the bank's still in existence, but also took money out of other accounts that I don't have access to it, and I would have access to all that data. And
The
it's,
problem with that is that that's a multi-state, so that one should go to the feds first, because while it could have happened in Philadelphia, where that's where the other person does, we would have jurisdiction, but because that's potentially a wire fraud or mail fraud or other type of fraud that are only covered by the federal government, that are not local, their statute of limitations may be extendable based upon when you discovered the crime versus when it began. It could extend it. But a regular theft statute in Philadelphia, theft by deception, has a maximum sentence of 7 years, but I only have 3 years of a statute of limitation. But on some of those wire fraud, because they're going through multiple states, or mail fraud with the individual, that would also be something that our partners in the Fed would have to review to see if there's another way that they could get access to it by sitting down with you and going over what you have as transactions. But it may be when you report it, as they're saying, document everything, as the lawyers in the room would say, but that may, if you present that to the feds and our federal counterparts in the U.S. Attorney's Office here or in Jersey, they would communicate with Maine, Philly, Jersey to figure out who would take that, because you're incorporated maybe in Jersey, but if the victim is here. Also, there's change in different administrations. So this new U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia has been in existence under this new U.S. Attorney for maybe 6 weeks. So they may not have all their people in place yet, whereas Maine and New Jersey are a little bit more stable. So maybe you take it to them. But that would be a federal case to report it. And is the victim willing to go along with that, or they think that that's not a different thing
that's
too?
the problem, right? You have the elderly victim, you have the caretaker up way up north,
Right.
and private Philly. I mean, it's a problem we have. We have so many branches too. We have so many multiple
Right.
jurisdictions.
Right.
We run into, you know,
Right, and that's what, as Joe's saying and everyone's saying, having a task force and having someone to go to and be like, where do I take this? And we try to have federal counterparts or state counterparts. A lot of times, the Attorney General's office in the state will work directly a little bit better with the federal counterparts and us from the county. Because I'm only Philadelphia County, but having been a former AG, there's different hotlines you would call there, and then maybe they could filter it out. Maybe, you know, the Jersey State Attorney General's office has a program here where they would be able to work it. I received calls from other states in my new position that they're like, we have this scam going on. We think they're depositing it in Philadelphia, but we're gonna prosecute it. I'm like, all right, let me know if you need any assistance from our agency or any of our police department. I'll get you in touch with people that can help you, since you're prosecuting it from Massachusetts, because the deposits were here, but the scammer is up in Massachusetts. So it's just more of a connecting with the right people. But I would always go to your local resource, but if not the state attorney general's office of that state. So I would try Jersey, if not the feds. But the feds are not necessarily gonna take calls from someone at the bank unless you know someone specific.
All right, thanks for all your questions. We appreciate it. We just have one last thing. We are going to show you a video from the Penn Memory Center, just a short video to end things.
Wealth care isn't just a clever play on words. It's a concept that recognizes several facts. First, with aging, older adults' brains change. They may change because of diseases like Alzheimer's disease, which cause troubles with managing finances, or they may change because of changes related to cognitive aging, the losses in fluid intelligence that also can cause troubles managing complicated daily tasks like finances. Older adults also experience cognitive aging changes in how they process emotions and in their time perspective. They tend to be more present focused and focusing on positive emotions. So put those three potential changes in the brain together, it can make an older adult more likely to have problems managing finances or being a victim of a scam or fraud. Another fact that creates the concept of wealth care is that as older adults reach their period of decumulation, which we used to call retirement, their priorities start to change. They become more focused on their health and preserving their wealth. In fact, surveys repeatedly show those are older adults' two top priorities, maintaining my health and then my wealth. Another fact that supports the reality of wealth care is that older adults typically have multiple accounts spread across multiple different institutions, and there are a lot of actors at play here, family, friend, and foe, and sometimes family and friend are also foe. And so it isn't just an individual managing their accounts. There are many different people who have a say, managers, family, friends, etc., and many different accounts. And things need to be coordinated and organized, and some watching needs to occur to make sure things aren't going wrong. When you put the facts of wealth care together, they add up to a public health issue. And if you then look to the social and ecological model of public health, you have a perfect way to organize how to think about the issue and then develop interventions to surveil, prevent, and as necessary, intervene in the event that something does go wrong. So start at the level of the individual. There are steps they can take. First, steps to help maintain their cognition. Habits that are well associated with preservation of cognitive health, like exercise, cardiovascular health, and if symptoms or problems of cognition are occurring, getting an evaluation. They can also identify trusted other people who can help them to watch over and surveil if there are problems, family, friends, etc. Even more powerful is the application of technology that can be deployed to allow remote monitoring of accounts, where individuals who are doing that monitoring, such as a family member or friend or the financial institution, can see what's going on, but can't take intervention like writing checks or otherwise even seeing the balances. At the community level, we can envision how the rules and regulations that govern banks and financial institutions can be altered to allow institutions to hold transactions where there are concerns, to make appropriate referrals to adult protective services or to healthcare providers, even if they suspect or are worried about an older adult's financial capacity. At the level of the firm, there are steps that can be taken. First, technology, as I've already mentioned, such as the ability to develop learning algorithms to identify people who are having trouble, as well as monitoring to identify people who have made mistakes or who are being defrauded. But technology isn't the only solution here. The staff, the people who work in banks and financial institutions need to be trained in how to communicate with older adults and how to help them make decisions about their finances. And we need to kind of move towards more of a model of shared decision-making between the financial manager and the older adult to arrive at a plan for their wealth care that's going to work for them. And also for the financial manager to identify when an older adult's having problems and how to A, identify that, and B, communicate the concern and then take action.
Right foot red and left hand blue. I'm tangled up when you get through. Don't know what the hell to do.
Well, finally, I'm just going to leave you. It's funny, I just got this in the mail. Someone was talking about a Wells Fargo survey earlier. I think I just got the results of it in my email from Wells Fargo on elder financial abuse. And I just did the numbers in here. 6 people in here, their parents are going to be victims, according to statistics. It's 1 in 5. So that's how big the problem is. Women, twice as likely to be victims of financial abuse. And 66% of financial abuse cases involve a family member. So That's where we are. That's just to reinforce what we heard today. I want to thank all of our panelists for coming today. I want to thank the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia for hosting us. Thanks for the task force for continuing their efforts and awareness to combat this, because this is a problem that's not getting any better, and we really appreciate you coming out, taking the information that you learned today and bringing it to the stakeholders out in our community. Thanks again, I appreciate it.